Artichokes to Herbs by Rafe Henry Barber. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Read by Beeswaxcandle. Artichokes to Herbs. Wanted. Boy to work in garden, apply within. That was the legend that stared at me that May morning as I returned from the post office. The ink was, I think, scarcely dry on the fresh new shingle, and it is probable, I reflected, looking up and down the empty village street, that I am the first to see it. I studied it and pondered. Some years before I had amused myself with the science of determining character by handwriting. It was at a time when the thing was something of a fad, and I had attained to a degree of proficiency that had placed me in demand at social affairs. I had only to frown for a moment over the merest scrap of writing in order to describe with startling accuracy the character and even the outward appearance of the writer, providing only that I knew the person. And so this morning, tucking 2 magazines, a bundle of proof, and yesterday's New York Times under one elbow, I concentrated on that sign. The fact that the letters had evidently been made with a paintbrush dipped in writing ink, that the ink had spread and trickled, might have dismayed a less adept student. But despite this handicap, and despite the fact that printed letters are less characteristic than written ones, I was speedily able to evolve a very correct impression of the person who had made the inscription. I shall not weary you by following all the clever mental processes by which I arrived at my results, although, not to astound you too greatly, I will explain that the sex of the person was determined by noting that, while most of the letters conformed more or less closely to the accepted styles of printed characters, others, notably the N's and Y's, were traced in script. Consequently, the person was a female, and, judging by a certain impetuosity discernible in the performance, young. I placed the age at 20. The lower hooks of the Y's told me that she was cheerful, energetic, generous, possibly quick-tempered, forgiving, fond of music, flowers, and out of doors, and had a passion for gardening. The capital W, always an eloquent letter, put her height at 5 feet and 5 inches, endowed her with slenderness and grace, and gave her hair that was red copper in the sunlight, warm brown eyes, a mouth that was like the folded petals of a deeply pink rose, and a fascinating dimple in her chin. I think it was the shape of the N's, or it may have been the way in which the P's were carried below the line, that told me her voice was crisp and sweet, and her laugh for all the world like the gurgle of water over golden pebbles. And finally, it was the exclamation point which informed me that she was partial to blue, and frequently appeared in a wide-brimmed straw hat, which had a most annoying way of flopping over her face just when that is, when one didn't want to. It took less time to make these discoveries than it has taken to recount them, and long before I had arrived at the last of them I had made up my mind. Here, I told myself, was an opportunity not to be neglected. I was, for the time, out of employment, so to speak, and while I have never helped in a garden, I could, I firmly believed, soon make myself quite invaluable to my employer. Besides, the sign made no request for skilled labour. At least I could apply. The small white gate swung creakingly between the greening lilac bushes, and I strode valiantly up the red brick walk. Beside me, pink and white and yellow tulips still flamed. The breeze rustled the Times under my arm with an agitation which, I confess, threatened to communicate itself to me. I had never before applied for employment, and had the distance between gate and front door being greater, I am convinced that I should have turned back. But I didn't. I pulled an old-fashioned crockery knob, and somewhere inside the little white house a bell jingle-jangled. Footsteps neared the door. I composed my features and propped my courage. "Well?" It was an angular woman with wispy grey hair and steel-rimmed spectacles who opened the door and coldly interrogated me. As she spoke, she wiped her knobby fingers on a faded blue apron. I smiled disarmingly. "I would like to see the person who wants a boy." "Oh," she said, and viewed me with distressing suspicion through the blurred lenses of those appalling spectacles. "Who'll I tell her wants to see her?" She wouldn't know my name," I replied with one of my best bows. "Just tell her I came about the advertisement." "Humph," she said. She drew aside as if granting me admittance, but in the next instant barred my way with a thin but capable arm. "That's all very well," she went on, "but if you've got anything to sell, we don't want any young man." "I am offering only my services, madam," I replied, and slipped under the arm. "Well, you can go in there." She pointed doubtfully toward an open door, viewed me askance, and went muttering away. I found myself in twilight, alone with a marble-topped table and horsehair furniture and the family Bible. I wished for an instant that I had not decided to seek employment. There was something about that room. "You wanted to see me?" She had entered while I was returning the accusing frown of the family Bible. In the hallowed twilight she failed for a moment to see me clearly, I think, for it was not until I had replied that the colour stole into her cheeks. "If you please," I said. "I was passing and happened to see your sign, Miss—" She refused my invitation. "Won't you sit down?" she asked, just a trifle breathlessly. I seated myself fearfully on a slippery mound of horsehair. "You know of a boy who would perhaps like to come here?" she went on. "Yes. Or that's to say, possibly not exactly a boy. Not a boy in the generally accepted meaning. Of course, the term boy is relative. What I mean to say is that—" My words trailed away into silence. Applying for a position was much more difficult than I had realized. I smiled what I hoped was an easy and confident smile. I don't believe now that it was. "Perhaps," said she, "you had better tell me who he is. Probably I know him." She seemed quite self-possessed now, and easily attained the smile I had failed at. I had meant to work up to the revelation of the identity of my candidate by early stages, to prepare her for it. But instead I found myself replying boldly, "I am." She did not appear in the least surprised. "I'm afraid," she continued, smiling politely, "you didn't read the sign very attentively. I advertise for a boy." "Oh, yes," I said, throwing one knee nonchalantly across the other to show her that I was quite at ease, and narrowly escaping sliding to the floor. "But I can do anything that a boy can. In fact, as I was explaining, the term boy is capable of a wide range of meaning. In spite of the fact that I am 28, I still look on myself as a boy. Can you weed?" "Oh, yes." "That is, I see no reason why I shouldn't be able to. As I understand it, weeding consists of chopping the soil up with a hoe. I am sure I could do that as well as a younger boy." "The sort of weeding I want performed is done with the hands and not with the hoe. Have you ever worked in a garden?" "I once assisted at the transplanting of a purple clematis. The lamentable fact that the clematis afterward died is not to be attributed to any lack of skill on my part. It was a most anemic-looking vine in the first place. Then I have occasionally helped my mother cut flowers. I usually held the basket." I smiled hopefully. She shook her head. "I'm afraid," she said, "that you aren't sufficiently experienced." "But I'm very quick to learn. You don't have to show me what you want it done." "I'd be afraid you'd pull up the vegetables with the weeds," she replied. "Besides," and a ghost of a smile flitted across her face, "I don't believe the wages will be large enough to tempt you." But you don't know," I said eagerly. I'd work for very little, mere pittance, only enough to keep soul and body together. I think that is the correct expression." "I pay only 15 cents an hour, and that, I fear—" "But that is $1.20 a day, $8.40 a week." "You are counting Sundays," she interrupted. "I shouldn't want you Sundays." "Then $7.20 a week, or $28 a month. $28 a month is not so bad. I'll take it." But she shook her head again. "I don't think you do," she said. "I'm very sorry." She smiled quite kindly. "You're making a great mistake," I warned her. "I am positive that I have in me the making of a fine gardener. I have always been extremely fond of flowers and vegetables. I have a genuine passion for artichokes." "I don't raise artichokes," she replied. She stood up, and I was forced to conclude that the interview was at an end. I also arose, very carefully. "Perhaps," I ventured, "you wouldn't mind taking my name and address in case you were unable to find anyone else?" Maybe my very evident disappointment touched her. At all events, she nodded. "William Hodge, lady, and I live—" "Hodge?" she asked a trifle sceptically. "Well, it's not my real name, but in all the books I have read, the farmers are called William or Bill Hodge, and I thought—" "It will do very well," she said gravely. "And the address?" "In care of Mrs. Saunders." "Then," she said without a flicker of a lash, "you live quite close by, don't you?" Just across the fence." "That would be an advantage, don't you think?" "Possibly. It would make it easy for you to get to work early. Say by 6:30. "Half-past? Oh, yes, certainly. Then I will let you know if I should require you," she said. "Good morning." "Good morning." I managed a very passable bow as I stepped through the door. "In regard to references—" "Yes?" she asked, pausing in the act of closing the portal. "I can show you an excellent letter of recommendation from my last employer." "The lady you helped transplant the unfortunate clematis?" "Oh, no. I was not regularly employed on that occasion. My last place—" "I should be very glad to read your letter in case I decide to employ you." The door closed slowly but irrevocably. On the way down the path, I congratulated myself on the success with which I had predicted at least her outward appearance by my almost marvellous gift. I had been absolutely correct, even to the dimple. 2. "Good morning. I trust the cabbages are doing well?" "The cabbages are not yet planted," she replied, acknowledging my greeting with a sober inclination of her head. She wore blue, just as I had foretold she would, and that disagreeable but entirely becoming floppy hat did not wholly hide from me the knowledge that her brown eyes held in them a gleam that was not merely sunlight. She dusted her gloved hands lightly together and observed me gravely across the picket fence. "I wonder," she said after a moment, "if you are aware that you are standing in Mrs. Saunders' rhubarb bed?" I looked down. "Those funny greeny-pinky knobs that I see rhubarb?" I asked interestedly. She nodded. I moved my feet cautiously. "Demolished only one. It will probably recover," I murmured. She moved nearer and viewed it through the pickets. "You have killed at least 2 pies and a quart of sauce," she said severely. "I'm sorry about the pies and tickled to death about the sauce. You haven't filled that position yet?" "Not yet. In fact, you are so far the only applicant, Mr. "Hodge," I prompted. "Then I may still hope." She frowned. Do you think that walking on the rhubarb recommends you for the position?"
"But how was I to know that Mrs. Saunders had rhubarb planted here? It is a very poor location for rhubarb, which demands a great deal of sun."
I examined her face anxiously. Evidently I had scored. I went on with added assurance.
"Yes, a great deal of sun and moisture and humus."
She laughed. "What a lot you know," she said. "Have you been studying?"
"A little," I owned. "Mrs. Saunders loaned me a seed catalogue. I found it quite rich in information. Now, for instance, take beets. You'll see I've only got as far as the bees. Beets should be sown very early in the spring in drills 15 inches apart. Cover the seed to the depth of 1 inch and later thin out to 12 inches. No, that's asparagus. Let me see now. Beets. I thin mine out to 6 inches apart." "Oh, correct. 6 inches is right. The soil should be deeply fertilized and well cultivated."
"Admirable," she applauded.
"It's really nothing," I murmured modestly. "Ask me anything as far as cabbage, except broccoli." My book was singularly silent on the subject of broccoli. It informed me that the vegetable resembled the cauliflower but was hardier. As I haven't got as far as cauliflower yet—
"But of course you are up on beans."
Yes, I flatter myself that I know beans, though I'll acknowledge that the subject is a confusing one. There are so many varieties, you see, dwarf and pole and English and green-podded and wax-podded. A most confusing array of beans. I'd much rather you examine me on artichokes. I'm thoroughly prepared on artichokes."
"But I am not. I've never grown them."
"The artichoke," I began glibly, "is a most delicious vegetable, rapidly gaining in popularity. The heads are usually boiled, and the bottom of each scale eaten with salt and butter. In France, they are frequently baked, with a dressing of fresh butter, forming a most savoury delicacy. The seed should be sown in April or May, and—
100, she interrupted.
Thanks. Don't you think that my knowledge of vegetables as far as cabbage is enough to warrant a trial? Suppose you set me to weeding the A's and B's today. Tonight, I have no doubt I could progress as far as—
What comes after cabbage? The cabbage worm, she replied.
Cauliflower and carrot, I said triumphantly, and celery. Tomorrow you'll find me halfway through the C's. What do you say?
Book learning's all very well, sir, but practical knowledge is better. Suppose you look over there and tell me what you see growing.
Are they all A's and B's? I faltered.
4 of them are. Which, Mr. Hodge, are the beans?
Of course, beans, I muttered, are difficult. But let me see.
I viewed the neat rows of green sprouts and leaves attentively.
The beans, I decided finally, are those things with the arrow-shaped leaves.
Right. And next to the beans?
Beets, I hazarded.
Lettuce, silly.
But I haven't got to lettuce yet. That wasn't fair.
Then tell me which the beets are.
I don't see any. Besides, beets grow underground. If you'll let me come over there and pull up some of those things, I'll tell you in a minute. And anyway, I don't see that the ability to distinguish a beet from a broccoli is a necessary attribute of the skilled weeder. Every man to his trade, say I. I'm a weeder, not a horticultural detective. Doesn't make a particle of difference to me whether I'm weeding beets or cabbages. Show me a weed and I know it instantly, and it were better for that weed had it never been born.
Well, she said, perhaps, if I can find no one else.
And then there's that letter of recommendation, I reminded. When you've read that, you won't hesitate a minute.
You have it with you? She asked.
I'm sorry to say I haven't, but it'll only take me a few minutes to— I can soon find it.
Bring it tomorrow, she said, and I'll read it, but I won't promise more." "But you're not going now," I protested. "Why, there's lots of work to be done yet. Just look at the lettuce. It needs cultivation badly, and those other things over there are simply choked with weeds. You haven't the heart to leave them like that." "I shall have to, I fear. It must be nearly 11, isn't it?" I lied a half hour, but accomplished nothing. She disappeared into the house. The garden seemed strangely dull and uninteresting. I felt sorry for the poor, neglected little lettuces and peas and other things whose names I didn't know. The sunlight, which had been radiantly bright, paled perceptibly, and the little easterly breeze suddenly grew chill and unsympathetic. I, too, went indoors to sit at the window of my room, which overlooked the next-door garden, and consume much tobacco, and watch the gate between the lilacs. After a long time she passed through, and went from sight up the quiet street. With a sigh, I pulled a half-written sheet from the typewriter, introduced a clean one, and wrote myself a glowing letter of recommendation. That evening I went back to the seed catalogue, and got as far as chervil. Chervil was like broccoli, and later sea kale, inasmuch as my authority was strangely silent as to all except the price. But I got on excellently with cabbage, cauliflower, and carrots. That night I awoke to hear the rain pattering softly on the tin roof outside my south window. It was a pleasant sound, for it reminded me of the dear little lettuces and beets, which I reflected sleepily must be enjoying the shower, and the dear little lettuces and beets reminded me of my charming neighbour, and thinking of her, I went to sleep again and dreamed. 3. "The reference is most enthusiastic," said she. "But quite deserved," I assured her. "The only objection seems to be that it fails to indicate what the occupation was in which you were, let me see, intelligent, industrious, and trustworthy." "Oh, does it?" I leaned across the pickets to cast my eyes over the document she held. So it does. I must have forgotten that." "You must have," she agreed gravely. "But does it matter? I have acknowledged my ignorance of gardening and of vegetables, that is, beyond chervil. I make no false pretences, you see, but as the letter emphasizes the fact that I am apt and quick to learn, besides being sober and respectful and the other things you just read, it seems to me that you can't do better than to take me on trial." "If only you had shown me this yesterday," she sighed. "Why yesterday? Yesterday isn't half the day today is." "But yesterday the position was still open. Today—"
"You don't mean that you have hired someone?" I asked, dismayed.
She nodded. "And he hasn't any references at all." I observed her gloomily. "You'll be sorry," I said finally. "He will probably be addicted to the use of liquor and go to sleep on the leeks and the cardoons, and he'll probably pull up the beets and mistake for weeds. It is tempting Providence to employ anyone without references." "I don't think he drinks," she said doubtfully. "You see, he is only 14. "Then he'll be much too frail for the work. I don't approve of child labour." After a moment of reflection, I cheered up. "Anyway," I said, "he won't last." "You were not very encouraging," she charged, "and I had such hard work getting him, too." "When does he come?" "He promised to be here this morning," she faltered. "There it is, you see," I said triumphantly. "He is not to be depended on. I marvel at your trusting the precious lives of the poor little lettuces and beetses to one who—" "Oh, there he is now," she exclaimed. "Here I am, Arthur."
"Arthur," I muttered disagreeably. "I ask you if that is a proper name for a gardener. And what is the matter with his face?"
"Freckles," she whispered hurriedly. "Not so loud or he will hear you. I must set him to work. Good morning."
"It isn't a good morning," I protested moodily. "It is a miserable morning. I shall stay here and watch him fall asleep in the onions. Besides, I don't believe he's 14. doesn't look a day over 12. He's a mere infant. I'd be ashamed to ask him to work out there in the hot sun. His death will be at your door, and—" But she only nodded brightly and hurried toward Arthur. You're coming back?" I asked anxiously. She paused and shook her head. "No, I shall be very busy this morning. There's so much to be done." But my examination," I protested. "Cabbage, cauliflower, carrot, corn salad, chicory." She only laughed. For some time I leaned over the fence and watched them gloomily. Arthur displayed a knack with the hoe that no one would have suspected him of. I determined to purchase a hoe and practice with it in the seclusion of my room. Neither of them took any notice of me, and after a while I left them haughtily. Departing, I discovered with satisfaction that several more rhubarb pies and much sauce had been nipped in the bud. I did quite a deal of work that morning, hoping that the clatter of my typewriter would annoy them. It didn't seem to. Together they finished with the peas and hand-weeded the beets and something else which, by referring to my catalogue, it was entertainingly illustrated, I concluded to be carrots. After that, Arthur proceeded alone, and the steady chop-chop of his hoe kept time to the vicious click of my machine. The next morning, when I took up my position among the rhubarb tips, I found Arthur alone in the garden. He was planting some small, spindly, discouraged-looking things which he had kidnapped from a box with a trowel. I watched him in silence for a while, then asked what he was doing. He said he was transplanting tomatoes. It was just like him to call them something I hadn't got to. I viewed him sarcastically, just to let him know that he wasn't fooling me a bit, and made a mental note to study up on tomatoes at once, no matter if they were out of turn. Arthur was not a conversationalist, and my suggestive remarks anent the weather and the appearance of the beans — I was sure about the beans — elicited only grins or muttered words. I was very glad when the gardener-in-chief emerged from the white door of the house. It seemed to me that she remained an unnecessarily long time with Arthur. I think she tried to make me believe that she didn't see me, but I was not deceived. When she did finally come across the strawberry bed and say, "Good morning," I felt wounded and let her know it. "Good morning," I replied stiffly. "German, Welschkorn. Spanish, maize. Culture: select a warm soil if possible, especially for the earlier varieties, which should not be planted before the 10th of May. Successive planting should be made every fortnight until July. Plant in—" "What on earth are you talking about?" she asked. "Corn. If you want to hear me on celery first, all right. For that matter," I added plaintively, "we've skipped cabbage and cauliflower and cardoon and—" "What's cardoon?" she asked. "Search me. It's in the catalogue, though. You blanch it by tying the leaves together, and then you cook the midribs, whatever those are, just like asparagus. It seems to me, Mr. Hodge, Bill Hodge, ma'am, at your service, that you are far more interested in the cooking of vegetables than the growing of them," she said with a laugh. I refused to be placated. "Are those tomatoes he's planting?" I asked. She nodded. "He said they were, but he looks untruthful. You'd better be quite certain. I wouldn't trust him not to substitute thistles or dandelions." "Don't you love dandelions?" she exclaimed. "I haven't got to them yet," I replied cautiously. "I'm only as far as cucumber." "You're dreadfully silly," she said. I wish you'd tell me something." "I will if it's not beyond page 19. "It hasn't got anything to do with vegetables. What are you doing here?" "Doing here? Why, helping you garden, of course." "I mean in Lindenville. How did you happen to come here, and why?" "Oh, that. Well, it was an accident. I started from New York with a friend in his car. We were going to a place called Somerset. It's somewhere on the coast. We broke down 3 times. The 3rd time was in front of the post office here. By then my patience was exhausted. 'You may,' I told him, 'ultimately reach Somerset, but I don't think you will. Or if you do, it will be with this car on your back. I shall leave you here, and I did."
"How funny," she murmured. "Had you ever been here before?"
"Never. It didn't matter. I only wanted peace and quiet, and I thought I'd find them here. And I have. At least, quiet."
And what do you do up there?" She nodded toward my window.
"Right," I said distastefully.
"Oh, are you an author?"
"I suppose so. At least, I write books."
"And are you writing one now?" she demanded eagerly.
"I'm trying to in the intervals of learning horticulture or agriculture or whatever it is. I don't have much time. If I were properly encouraged in my studies,
it must be splendid to write things. What sort of things do you do?"
"Novels," I said dejectedly.
"I don't think I've read any," she replied thoughtfully.
"They're not frowned on as they used to be."
"I mean any of yours."
"Oh, well, that doesn't surprise me. I'm constantly meeting persons who haven't. In fact, I almost never meet anyone who has. I sometimes wonder who buys them, and what for."
"I shall, though."
"Thanks. I'll send for one."
"Oh, I didn't mean—"
"Neither do I. We'll trade. A novel for a mess of peas."
"But the peas won't be ready for a long time. They're quite late this year."
"They wouldn't be if they were properly looked after."
"Then perhaps I'd better go and look after them," she murmured.
"If you had a good assistant—"
"With references?"
"With references. He could ripen those peas in no time. Have you noticed this picket?"
"No. What about it?"
"It's loose."
"Oh." She examined it interestedly. "So it is. It only needs a nail, though."
"If it came off, there'd be space for one to crawl through," I said musingly.
"I must go and look after Arthur," she said hurriedly.
4. For spring use, sow in September and cover lightly with litter in November. 1 ounce will sow 100 feet of drill. 10 to 12 pounds will sow an acre.
"Fancy an acre of spinach," murmured Joan.
"I'd rather fancy an acre of artichoke," I replied.
"I believe," she remarked a little contemptuously, "you'd rather eat artichokes than onions?"
"I should, even considered aesthetically."
"I didn't say onions. You looked them. How does one look onions? No, don't try to explain. It's much too warm. And if we're going to pick the peas—"
"We are presently. Let us rest first. My examination in rhubarb, salsify, and spinach has quite exhausted me."
Joan sniffed. "You've been very slow with your lessons of late. Here it is, the middle of June, and you're not through yet."
"But what I have learned thoroughly. It's all here." I tapped my forehead. "Artichokes, asparagus, cucumber, leek."
"Especially artichoke. And even yet you can't tell radishes from turnips."
"I can by the taste," I defended. "When growing and in the immature stage, they are confusingly similar in appearance, and almost anyone might mistake one for t'other. You must acknowledge, however, that it took me scarcely a minute yesterday to say which were eggplants and which were cabbages." We were sitting under the apple tree. There was only one apple tree. The others were pear and peach. They're quite different. An empty basket reposed between us, and at a little distance Arthur Junior swayed lazily in the warm breeze. I had named him Arthur Junior because he looked very much like the original Arthur. We had had a great deal of fun making Arthur Junior. Joan's father's wardrobe had supplied everything but the stuffing and the brilliant scarlet four-in-hand tie. The tie was a happy thought of mine, and I have always maintained that the fact that Joan's young corn was unmolested by crows was entirely due to the tie. No crow with an ounce of caution would have approached within 50 yards of that tie. The original Arthur was not with us this morning. He came now only in the late afternoon, for his almost uncanny ability with a hoe had long since discouraged the weeds.
"I finished your book," said Joan presently,
"and I know. You liked it immensely, thank you. But I didn't, said Joan calmly. I thought it rather disagreeable and unnecessary. Bless you. I don't see why you needed to write such horrid, pessimistic things. You're not that way yourself. You can't tell. Who knows whether the real me is the frivolous, light-hearted person the world sees, or the dejected, blighted soul reflected in my novels? Perhaps I'm a dual personality. That would be rather interesting, wouldn't it? Don't be absurd. Is the story you are writing now like the other? Oh, much more so, I replied. It is one long streak of blue-black gloom from first chapter to last. It is a strange fact that the happier I feel, the more hopelessly I can write. Is it nearly done? Far from it. I've had to rewrite several chapters of late. I found that my heroine was becoming quite bright and contented. That's the worst of heroines. You have to watch them all the time. You simply can't trust them. Now a hero, you can depend to go on right through the story as you start him. But didn't you say that you had promised to have it done by the 1st of July? Oh, yes. But publishers never expect authors to keep promises. I fancied they'd resented horribly if I delivered the manuscript to them by the 1st. At least, it would quite destroy their confidence in me. Then you are going to stay here until the summer? Asked Joan uninterestedly. Perhaps through it. Perhaps forever. I dislike moving about. I've noticed that, she murmured. I glanced at her sharply. She was seemingly absorbed in Arthur Jr. Besides, I added, there's your garden. Heaven knows what would happen to it if I deserted you in the middle of the season. Without my advice and assistance, Papa, said Joan, asked me the other day where I had met you. And you told him? I said you had called. I suppose he thought someone had introduced you. I dare say he would be horribly alarmed if he knew that I had introduced myself, that you never had been. Why did you do that? You didn't have to. Mrs. Saunders would have introduced us if you'd asked her. I acted on impulse, Joan. You may not have observed it, perhaps, but I am frightfully impulsive. Besides, my way was much more romantic, and there is so little romance in life that we should take all we can find. Of course, if you insist on an introduction in proper style, it isn't too late, even now. Mrs. Saunders is washing blankets or something over there, and I need only call to her. Or for that matter, there's Arthur. It's too late now, said Joan. There's only one thing to be done. And that? I asked anxiously. Pick peas, said Joan. 5. £10 will sow an acre in drills, and £3 will sow an acre broadcast, I ended. There, that's the last. Unless, I added, you think I ought to go into sweet, pot, and medicinal herbs, or farm and field grasses. Those would be advanced courses, wouldn't they? Asked Joan doubtfully. No, I don't think you need to learn any more. Stop at turnip. I sighed relievedly. The weather was warm, even for early July, and the prospect of further study was not appealing. It was afternoon, golden, languorous. From the direction of the garden, around the corner of the little white house, came the tick, tick, tick of Arthur's busy hoe. Through the broad leaves of the Aristolochia sipho, the sun stole in dazzling rays. The village street was quiet and deserted. The house was also quiet, but not deserted. Somewhere in its cool, dim depths, Nancy, she of the steel-rimmed spectacles, was lurking. From far away came the faint screech of a locomotive. It reminded me disagreeably of something. In a way, I said presently, I feel that you have kept me here under false pretences, Joan. She looked a question. You didn't tell me, I went on, that you'd be going off the middle of this month. I don't think you asked me, sir. Possibly not. Necessitates a violent upheaval, however, in my placid existence. I have always hated to break camp. Need my departure alter your plans? Asked Joan. It must, I replied emphatically. I couldn't bear to stay here and meet daily the accusing looks of the corn and onions. How you have the heart to leave them I don't see. If you are, in a measure, betraying my trust, Joan, imagine what the vegetables must think of your defection. You are morally responsible for their welfare. You can't deny it. You are Arthur, she began. Even Arthur, I interrupted sternly, can't take your place with them. At the best, Arthur is only a foster parent. Who, I ask you, is to eat that early corn? You, if you stay. I shall not stay. Then Mrs. Saunders and Arthur and the Williamses. Good Lord! To think that I have slaved and toiled over that corn to tickle the palate of Arthur. And anyhow, said Joan, the corn won't be really fit to eat before the 1st of August, and we will be back soon after that. Much may happen to your garden in 3 weeks, I said gloomily. The onions may have rust. One of those awful fungus diseases will probably attack the tomatoes. And I'm almost certain I saw a cutworm looking covetously at the cucumbers this morning. Of course I know what you thought. You thought I would stay on here and pluck the pretty little Nile-green cabbage worms from their leafy, dew-spangled nooks each morning while you were away. I thought nothing of the sort, replied Joan calmly. And chase cucumber beetles out of the blossoms and scrunch them to death. I refuse to do it. When I contemplate the innocent lives I have destroyed this summer, my soul is filled with loathing. Have you finished your book yet? Asked Joan unfeelingly. I have not. It may never be finished. I told you that I had to be perfectly happy in order to write my novels. I am not perfectly happy. Your treachery has made me most miserable. I'm very sorry, said Joan brightly. Are you really going away? I am. Which means that I must pack a steamer trunk and a bag, and that means that I shall arrive at my destination minus most everything I possess. I never pack up and move without leaving half my things behind. With me, moving is a most costly proceeding. Besides, I'm not at all sure I shall approve of this place. What place? Asked Joan. Well, whatever it is. You haven't told me yet. I hope, though, it is not fashionable. Do you mean where Papa and I are going? Asked Joan in some surprise. Naturally. Oh. Joan looked blank. But you mustn't. I mean, Papa... I don't see that Papa need bother his dear old head about it, I answered. But I don't think you ought to, murmured Joan. It would look funny, wouldn't it? Then it is fashionable. It isn't really. It's just a queer out-of-the-way little place called Squaw Point. You wouldn't like it, I know. Possibly not. But duty is duty, Joan. And my duty is to look after you. Your treatment of the poor little vegetable shows that you are not to be trusted. You observe that I say nothing of your treatment of me, which... Are you quite in earnest? Joan turned and viewed me gravely. Terribly in earnest, I answered just as soberly. Joan's brown eyes dropped, and Joan's red lips parted. Do you mind very much, Joan? I asked softly. If you go to Squaw Point? She asked tremulously. If I love you, Joan. She didn't answer at once. A black velvet bee buzzed indignantly through the vine, took in the situation, and trailed apologetically off again. Finally, do you? Asked Joan doubtfully. Very, very much, I said. More than artichokes? More than everything from artichokes to herbs. More than... Sure? Asked Joan, blushing and smiling. Oh, so very sure, Joan, I whispered. A chair was pushed back. A board squeaked. Very, very certain, Joan. Mrs. Saunders, murmured Joan. Let her, I said superbly. And just a moment afterward, when the sun was an hour lower, Joan, I asked, when did you begin to care, dear? Joan looked thoughtful and creased her forehead prettily. I think, she said finally, it was about the time we picked the first letters. Really?
began with me long before that. Why, I was lost the very first day I walked on the rhubarb." "I think," said Joan presently, "it would be nice to go and tell them about us." "Them?" "The corn and the cucumbers and everything, I mean." "And Arthur?" "And Arthur," she agreed with a little laugh. "Do you know," I said, as we went toward the garden hand in hand, "I fancy they've known it quite a while." Joan smiled secretively at Arthur, or perhaps at Arthur Jr. It was difficult to tell them apart at a little distance. "I am quite sure they have," she answered softly, because I told them." End of Artichokes to Herbs.
A Strayed Allegiance by Lucy Maud Montgomery. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by KatDC. A Strayed Allegiance. "Will you go to the cove with me this afternoon?" It was Marion Leslie who asked the question. Esterbrook Elliott unpinned with a masterful touch the delicate cluster of noisette rosebuds she wore at her throat and transferred them to his buttonhole as he answered courteously, "Certainly. My time, as you know, is entirely at your disposal." They were standing in the garden under the creamy bloom of drooping acacia trees. One long plume of blossoms touched lightly the soft, golden-brown coils of the girl's hair and cast a wavering shadow over the beautiful, flower-like face beneath it. Esterbrook Elliott, standing before her, thought proudly that he had never seen a woman who might compare with her. In every detail she satisfied his critical, fastidious taste. There was not a discordant touch about her. Esterbrook Elliott had always loved Marion Leslie, or thought he had. They had grown up together from childhood. He was an only son, and she an only daughter. It had always been an understood thing between the two families that the boy and girl should marry, but Marion's father had decreed that no positive pledge should pass between them until Marion was 21. Esterbrook accepted his mapped-out destiny and selected bride with the conviction that he was an exceptionally lucky fellow. Out of all the women in the world, Marion was the very one whom he would have chosen as mistress of his fine old home. She had been his boyhood's ideal. He believed that he loved her sincerely, but he was not too much in love to be blind to the worldly advantages of his marriage with his cousin. His father had died 2 years previously, leaving him wealthy and independent. Marion had lost her mother in childhood. Her father died when she was 18. Since then she had lived alone with her aunt. Her life was quiet and lonely. Esterbrook's companionship was all that brightened it, but it was enough. Marion lavished on him all the rich, womanly love of her heart. On her 21st birthday they were formally betrothed. They were to be married in the following autumn. No shadow had drifted across the heaven of her happiness. She believed herself secure in her lover's unfaltering devotion. True, at times she thought his manner lacked a lover's passionate ardor. He was always attentive and courteous. She had only to utter a wish to find that it had been anticipated. He spent every spare minute at her side. Yet sometimes she half wished he would betray more lover-like impatience and intensity. Were all lovers as calm and undemonstrative? She reproached herself for this incipient disloyalty as often as it vexingly intruded its unwelcome presence across her inner consciousness. Surely Esterbrook was fond and devoted enough to satisfy the most exacting demands of affection. Marion herself was somewhat undemonstrative and reserved. Passing acquaintances called her cold and proud. Only the privileged few knew the rich depths of womanly tenderness in her nature. Esterbrook thought that he fully appreciated her. As he had walked homeward the night of their betrothal, he had reviewed with unconscious criticism his mental catalogue of Marion's graces and good qualities, admitting with supreme satisfaction that there was not one thing about her that he could wish changed. This afternoon, under the acacias, They had been planning about their wedding. There was no one to consult but themselves. They were to be married early in September and then go abroad. Esterbrook mapped out the details of their bridal tour with careful thoughtfulness. They would visit all the old-world places that Marion wished to see. Afterwards they would come back home. He discussed certain changes he wished to make in the old Elliot mansion to fit it for a young and beautiful mistress. He did most of the planning. Marion was content to listen in happy silence. Afterwards she had proposed this walk to the cove. "What particular object of charity have you found at the cove now?" asked Esterbrook with lazy interest as they walked along. "Mrs. Barrett's little Bessie is very ill with fever," answered Marion. Then, catching his anxious look, she hastened to add, "It is nothing infectious, some kind of a slow, sapping variety. There is no danger, Esterbrook." "I was not afraid for myself," he replied quietly. "My alarm was for you. You are too precious to me, Marion, for me to permit you to risk health and life if it were dangerous. What a Lady Bountiful you are to those people at the cove. When we are married you must take me in hand and teach me your creed of charity. I'm afraid I've lived a rather selfish life. You will change all that, dear. You will make a good man of me." "You are that now, Esterbrook," she said softly. "If you were not, I could not love you." "It is a negative sort of goodness, I fear. I have never been tried or tempted severely. Perhaps I should fail under the test." "I am sure you would not," answered Marion proudly. Esterbrook laughed. Her faith in him was pleasant. He had no thought but that he would prove worthy of it. The cove, so called, was a little fishing hamlet situated on the low, sandy shore of a small bay. The houses, clustered in one spot, seemed like nothing so much as larger shells washed up by the sea, so grey and bleached were they from long exposure to sea winds and spray. Dozens of ragged children were playing about them, mingled with several disreputable yellow curs that yapped noisily at the strangers. Down on the sandy strip of beach below the houses groups of men were lounging about. The mackerel season had not yet set in. The spring herring netting was past. It was holiday time among the sea folks. They were enjoying it to the full, a happy, ragged colony, careless of what the morrows might bring forth. Out beyond, the boats were at anchor, floating as gracefully on the twinkling water as sea-birds, their tall masts bowing landward on the swell. A lazy, dreamful calm had fallen over the distant seas. The horizon blues were pale and dim. Faint purple hazes blurred the outlines of far-off headlands and cliffs. The yellow sands sparkled in the sunshine as if powdered with jewels. A murmurous babble of life buzzed about the hamlet, pierced through by the shrill undertones of the wrangling children, most of whom had paused in their play to scan the visitors with covert curiosity. Marion led the way to a house apart from the others at the very edge of the shelving rock. The dooryard was scrupulously clean and unlittered. The little footpath through it was neatly bordered by white clamshells. Several thrifty geraniums in bloom looked out from the muslin-curtained windows. A weary-faced woman came forward to meet them. "Bessie's much the same, Miss Leslie," she said, in answer to Marion's inquiry. "The doctor you sent was here today and did all he could for her. He seemed quite hopeful. She don't complain or nothing. Just lies there and moans. Sometimes she gets restless. It's very kind of you to come so often, Miss Leslie. Here, Magdalen, will you put this basket the ladies brought up there on the shelf?" A girl who had been sitting unnoticed with her back to the visitors at the head of the child's cot in one corner of the room stood up and slowly turned around. Marion and Esterbrook Elliot both started with involuntary surprise. Esterbrook caught his breath like a man suddenly awakened from sleep. In the name of all that was wonderful, who or what could this girl be, so little in harmony with her surroundings? Standing in the crepuscular light of the corner, her marvelous beauty shone out with the vivid richness of some rare painting. She was tall, and the magnificent proportions of her figure were enhanced rather than marred by the severely plain dress of dark print that she wore. The heavy masses of her hair, a shining auburn dashed with golden foam, were coiled in a rich glossy knot at the back of the classically modelled head, and rippled back from a low brow whose waxen fairness even the breezes of the ocean had spared. The girl's face was a full, perfect oval, with features of faultless regularity, and the large, full eyes were of tawny hazel, darkened into inscrutable gloom in the dimness of the corner. Not even Marion Leslie's face was more delicately tinted, but not a trace of colour appeared in the smooth, marble-like cheeks. Yet the waxen pallor bore no trace of disease or weakness, and the large, curving mouth was of an intense crimson. She stood quite motionless. There was no trace of embarrassment or self-consciousness in her pose. When Mrs. Barrett said, "This is my niece, Magdalen Crawford," she merely inclined her head in grave, silent acknowledgment. As she moved forward to take Marion's basket, she seemed oddly out of place in the low, crowded room. Her presence seemed to throw a strange restraint over the group. Marion rose and went over to the cot, laying her slender hand on the hot forehead of the little sufferer. The child opened its brown eyes questioningly. "How are you today, Bessie?"
"Magdalen, I want Magdalen,"
moaned the little plaintive voice. Magdalen came over and stood beside Marion Leslie. "She wants me," she said in a low, thrilling voice, free from all harsh accent or intonation. "I am the only one she seems to know always. Yes, darling, Magdalen is here, right beside you. She will not leave you." She knelt by the little cot and passed her arm under the child's neck, drawing the curly head close to her throat with a tender, soothing motion. Esterbrook Elliott watched the two women intently. The one standing by the cot, arrayed in simple yet costly apparel, with her beautiful, high-bred face, and the other, kneeling on the bare, sanded floor in her print dress, with her splendid head bent low over the child, and the long fringe of burnished lashes sweeping the cold pallor of the oval cheek. From the moment that Magdalen Crawford's haunting eyes had looked straight into his for one fleeting second, an unnameable thrill of pain and pleasure stirred his heart, a thrill so strong and sudden and passionate that his face paled with emotion. The room seemed to swim before his eyes in a mist out of which gleamed that wonderful face with its mesmeric, darkly radiant eyes, burning their way into deeps and abysses of his soul hitherto unknown to him. When the mist cleared away and his head grew steadier, he wondered at himself. Yet he trembled in every limb, and the only clear idea that struggled out of his confused thoughts was an overmastering desire to take that cold face between his hands and kiss it until its passionless marble glowed into warm and throbbing life. "Who is that girl?" he said abruptly when they had left the cottage. "She is the most beautiful woman I have ever seen, present company always excepted," he concluded, with a depreciatory laugh. The delicate bloom on Marion's face deepened slightly. "You had much better to have omitted that last sentence," she said quietly. "It was so palpably an afterthought. Yes, she is wonderfully lovely. A strange beauty, I fancied. There seemed something odd and uncanny about it to me. She must be Mrs. Barrett's niece. I remember that when I was down here about a month ago, Mrs. Barrett told me she expected a niece of hers to live with her, for a time at least. Her parents were both dead, the father having died recently. Mrs. Barrett seemed troubled about her. She said that the girl had been well brought up and used to better things than the cove could give her, and she feared that she would be very discontented and unhappy. I had forgotten all about it until I saw the girl today. She certainly seems to be a very superior person. She will find the cove very lonely, I am sure. It is not probable that she will stay there long. I must see what I can do for her, but her manner seemed rather repellent, don't you think?" "Hardly," responded Esterbrook curtly. "She seemed surprisingly dignified and self-possessed, I fancied, for a girl in her position. A princess could not have looked and bowed more royally. There was not a shadow of embarrassment in her manner, in spite of the incongruity of her surroundings. You had much better leave her alone, Marion. In all probability she would resent any condescension on your part. What wonderful, deep, lovely eyes she has!" Again the sensitive color flushed Marion's cheek as his voice lapsed unconsciously into a dreamy, retrospective tone, and a slight restraint came over her manner which did not depart. Esterbrook went away at sunset. Marion asked him to remain for the evening, but he pleaded some excuse. "I shall come tomorrow afternoon," he said, as he stooped to drop a careless good-bye kiss on her face. Marion watched him wistfully as he rode away, with an unaccountable pain in her heart. She felt more acutely than ever that there were depths in her lover's nature that she was powerless to stir into responsive life. Had any other that power? She thought of the girl at the cove, with her deep eyes and wonderful face. A chill of premonitory fear seized upon her. "I feel exactly as if Esterbrook had gone away from me forever," she said slowly to herself, stooping to brush her cheek against a dew-cold, milk-white acacia bloom, "and would never come back to me again. If that could happen, I wonder what there would be left to live for." Esterbrook Elliot meant, or honestly thought he meant, to go home when he left Marion. Nevertheless, when he reached the road branching off to the cove, he turned his horse down it with a flush on his dark cheek. He realized that the motive of the action was disloyal to Marion, and he felt ashamed of his weakness. But the desire to see Magdalen Crawford once more and to look into the depths of her eyes was stronger than all else, and overpowered every throb of duty and resistance. He saw nothing of her when he reached the cove. He could think of no excuse for calling at the Barrett cottage, so he rode slowly past the hamlet and along the shore. The sun, red as a smouldering ember, was half buried in the silken violet rim of the sea. The west was a vast lake of saffron and rose and ethereal green, through which floated the curved shallop of a thin new moon, slowly deepening from lustreless white through gleaming silver into burnished gold, and attended by one solitary pearl-white star. The vast concave of sky above was of violet, infinite and flawless. Far out, dusky amethystine islets clustered like gems on the shining breast of the bay. The little pools of water along the low shores glowed like mirrors of polished jacinth. The small, pine-fringed headlands ran out into the water, cutting its lustrous blue expanse like purple wedges. As Esterbrook turned one of them, he saw Magdalen standing out on the point of the next, a short distance away. Her back was towards him, and her splendid figure was outlined darkly against the vivid sky. Esterbrook sprang from his horse and left the animal standing by itself while he walked swiftly out to her. His heart throbbed suffocatingly. He was conscious of no direct purpose save merely to see her. She turned when he reached her with a slight start of surprise. His footsteps had made no sound on the tide-rippled sand. For a few moments they faced each other so, eyes burning into eyes with mute soul-probing and questioning. The sun had disappeared, leaving a stain of fiery red to mark his grave. The weird, radiant light was startlingly vivid and clear. Little crisp puffs and flakes of foam scurried over the point like elfin things. The fresh wind, blowing up the bay, tossed the lustrous rings of hair about Magdalen's pale face. All the routed shadows of the hour had found refuge in her eyes. Not a trace of color appeared in her face under Esterbrook Elliot's burning gaze. But when he said, "Magdalen," a single hot scorch of crimson flamed up into her cheeks protestingly. She lifted her hand with a splendid gesture, but no word passed her lips. "Magdalen, have you nothing to say to me?" he asked, coming closer to her with an imploring passion in his face never seen by Marion Leslie's eyes. He reached out his hand, but she stepped back from his touch. "What should I have to say to you?" "Say that you are glad to see me." "I am not glad to see you. You have no right to come here. But I knew you would come."
"You knew it? How?"
"Your eyes told me so today. I am not blind. I can see further than those dull fisher folks. Yes, I knew you would come. That is why I came here tonight, so that you would find me alone and I could tell you that you were not to come again."
"Why must you tell me that, Magdalen?"
"Because, as I have told you, you have no right to come."
"But if I will not obey you? If I will come in defiance of your prohibition?"
She turned her steady, luminous eyes on his pale, set face. "You would stamp yourself as a madman, then?" she said coldly. "I know that you are Miss Leslie's promised husband. Therefore you are either false to her or insulting to me. In either case, the companionship of Magdalen Crawford is not what you must seek. Go!" She turned away from him with an imperious gesture of dismissal. Esterbrook Elliott stepped forward and caught one firm white wrist.
"I shall not obey you,"
he said in a low, intense tone. His fine eyes burned into hers.
"You may send me away, but I will come back, again and yet again, until you have learned to welcome me. Why should you meet me like an enemy? Why can we not be friends?"
The girl faced him once more. "Because," she said proudly, "I am not your equal. There can be no friendship between us. There ought not to be. Magdalen Crawford, the fisherman's niece, is no companion for you. You will be foolish as well as disloyal if you ever try to see me again. Go back to the beautiful, high-bred woman you love and forget me. Perhaps you think I am talking strangely. Perhaps you think me bold and unwomanly to speak so plainly to you, a stranger. But there are some circumstances in life when plain speaking is best. I do not want to see you again. Now, go back to your own world." Esterbrook Elliott slowly turned from her and walked in silence back to the shore. In the shadows of the point he stopped to look back at her, standing out like some inspired prophetess against the fiery background of the sunset sky and silver-blue water. The sky overhead was thick sown with stars. The night breeze was blowing up from its lair in distant, echoing sea caves. On his right, the lights of the cove twinkled out through the dusk.
"I feel like a coward and a traitor," he said slowly. "Good God, what is this madness that has come over me? Is this my boasted strength of manhood?"
A moment later the hoof-beats of his horse died away up the shore. Magdalen Crawford lingered on the point until the last dull red faded out into the violet gloom of the June sea dusk, than which nothing can be rarer or diviner, and listened to the moan and murmur of the sea far out over the bay with sorrowful eyes and sternly set lips. The next day, when the afternoon sun hung hot and heavy over the water, Esterbrook Elliott came again to the cove. He found it deserted. A rumor of mackerel had come, and every boat had sailed out in the rose-red dawn to the fishing grounds. But down on a strip of sparkling yellow sand he saw Magdalen Crawford standing, her hand on the rope that fastened a small white dory to the fragment of a half-embedded wreck. She was watching a huddle of gulls clustered on the tip of a narrow sandy spit running out to the left. She turned at the sound of his hurried footfall behind her. Her face paled slightly, and into the depths of her eyes slept a passionate, mesmeric glow that faded as quickly as it came.
"You see, I have come back in spite of your command, Magdalen."
"I do see it," she answered in a gravely troubled voice. "You are a madman who refuses to be warned."
"Where are you going, Magdalen?"
She had loosened the rope from the wreck. "I'm going to row over to Chapel Point for salt. They think the boats will come in tonight loaded with mackerel. Look at them away out there, by the score. And salt will be needed."
"Can you row so far alone?"
"Easily. I learned to row long ago, for a pastime then. Since coming here, I find it of great service to me." She stepped lightly into the tiny shallop and picked up an oar. The brilliant sunshine streamed about her, burnishing the rich tints of her hair into ruddy gold. She balanced herself to the swaying of the dory with the grace of a sea-bird. The man looking at her felt his brain reel. "Goodbye, Mr. Elliott." For answer he sprang into the dory and, snatching an oar, pushed against the old wreck with such energy that the dory shot out from the shore like a foam bell. His sudden spring had set it rocking violently. Magdalen almost lost her footing and caught blindly at his arm. As her fingers closed on his wrist, a thrill as of fire shot through his every vein.
"Why have you done this, Mr. Elliot? You must go back."
"But I will not," he said masterfully, looking straight into her eyes with an imperiousness that sat well upon him. "I am going to row you over to Chapel Point. I have the oars. I will be master this once, at least." For an instant her eyes flashed defiant protest, then drooped before his. A sudden hot blush crimsoned her pale face. His will had mastered hers. The girl trembled from head to foot, and the proud, sensitive mouth quivered. Into the face of the man watching her breathlessly flashed a triumphant, passionate joy. He put out his hand and gently pushed her down into the seat. Sitting opposite, he took up the oars and pulled out over the sheet of sparkling blue water, through which at first the bottom of white sand glimmered wavily, but afterwards deepened to translucent, dim depths of greenness. His heart throbbed tumultuously. Once the thought of Marion drifted across his mind like a chill breath of wind, but it was forgotten when his eyes met Magdalen's. "Tell me about yourself, Magdalen," he said at last, breaking the tremulous, charmed, sparkling silence.
"There is nothing to tell,"
she answered with characteristic straightforwardness.
"My life has been a very uneventful one. I have never been rich or very well educated, but it used to be different from now. I had some chance before Father died."
"You must have found it very lonely and strange when you came here first."
"Yes. At first I thought I should die, but I do not mind it now. I have made friends with the sea. It has taught me a great deal. There is a kind of inspiration in the sea. When one listens to its never-ceasing murmur afar out there, always sounding at midnight and midday, one's soul goes out to meet eternity. Sometimes it gives me so much pleasure that it is almost pain." She stopped abruptly. "I don't know why I am talking to you like this."
"You are a strange girl, Magdalen. Have you no other companion than the sea?"
"No. Why should I wish to have? I shall not be here long."
Elliot's face contracted with a spasm of pain.
"You are not going away, Magdalen?"
"Yes, in the fall. I have my own living to earn, you know. I am very poor. Uncle and aunt are very kind, but I cannot consent to burden them any longer than I can help."
A sigh that was almost a moan broke from Esterbrook Elliot's lips.
"You must not go away, Magdalen. You must stay here with me."
"You forget yourself," she said proudly. "How dare you speak to me so? Have you forgotten Miss Leslie? Or are you a traitor to us both?"
Esterbrook made no answer. He bowed his pale, miserable face before her, self-condemned. The breast of the bay sparkled with its countless gems like the breast of a fair woman. The shores were purple and amethystine in the distance. Far out, bluish, phantom-like sails clustered against the pallid horizon. The dory danced like a feather over the ripples. They were close under the shadow of Chapel Point. Marion Leslie waited in vain for her lover that afternoon. When he came at last in the odorous dusk of the June night, she met him on the acacia-shadowed veranda with cold sweetness. Perhaps some subtle woman instinct whispered to her where and how he had spent the afternoon, for she offered him no kiss, nor did she ask him why he had failed to come sooner. His eyes lingered on her in the dim light, taking in every detail of her sweet womanly refinement and loveliness, and with difficulty he choked back a groan. Again he asked himself what madness had come over him, and again for an answer rose up the vision of Magdalen Crawford's face as he had seen it that day, crimsoning beneath his gaze. It was late when he left. Marion watched him out of sight, standing under the acacias. She shivered as with a sudden chill.
"I feel as I think Vashti must have felt," she murmured aloud. when, discrowned and unqueened, she crept out of the gates of Shushan to hide her broken heart. I wonder if Esther has already usurped my sceptre. Has that girl at the cove, with her pale, priestess-like face and mysterious eyes, stolen his heart from me? Perhaps not, for it may never have been mine. I know that Esterbrook Elliott will be true to the letter of his vows to me, no matter what it may cost him. But I want no pallid shadow of the love that belongs to another. The hour of abdication is at hand, I fear, and what will be left for throneless Vashti then? Esterbrook Elliott, walking home through the mocking calm of the night, fought a hard battle with himself. He was face to face with the truth at last, the bitter knowledge that he had never loved Marian Leslie, save with a fond, brotherly affection, and that he did love Magdalen Crawford with a passion that threatened to sweep before it every vestige of his honor and loyalty. He had seen her but 3 times, and his throbbing heart lay in the hollow of her cold white hand. He shut his eyes and groaned. What madness! What unutterable folly! He was not free. He was bound to another by every cord of honor and self-respect. And, even were he free, Magdalen Crawford would be no fit wife for him, in the eyes of the world at least. A girl from the Cove, a girl with little education and no social standing. Aye, but he loved her. He groaned again and again in his misery. Afar down the slope the bay waters lay like an inky strip, and the distant, murmurous plaint of the sea came out of the stillness of the night. The lights at the cove glimmered faintly. In the week that followed he went to the cove every day. Sometimes he did not see Magdalen, at other times he did. But at the end of the week he had conquered in the bitter, heart-crushing struggle with himself. If he had weakly given way to the first mad sweep of a new passion, the strength of his manhood reasserted itself at last. Faltering and wavering were over, though there was passionate pain in his voice when he said at last, "I am not coming back again, Magdalen." They were standing in the shadow of the pine-fringed point that ran out to the left of the cove. They had been walking together along the shore, watching the splendor of the sea sunset that flamed and glowed in the west, where there was a sea of mackerel clouds, crimson and amber-tinted, with long, ribbon-like strips of apple-green sky between. They had walked in silence, hand in hand, as children might have done, yet with the stir and throb of a mighty passion seething in their hearts. Magdalen turned as Esterbrook spoke, and looked at him in a long silence. The bay stretched out before them, tranced and shimmering. A few stars shone down through the gloom of dusk. Right across the translucent greens and roses and blues of the west hung a dark, unsightly cloud, like the blurred outline of a monstrous bat. In the dim, reflected light, the girl's mournful face took on a weird, unearthly beauty. She turned her eyes from Esterbrook Elliott's set white face to the radiant gloom of the sea. "That is best," she answered at last, slowly.
"Best? Yes. Better that we had never met. I love you. You know it. Words are idle between us. I never loved before. I thought I did. I made a mistake, and I must pay the penalty of that mistake. You understand me?"
"I understand," she answered simply.
"I do not excuse myself. I have been weak and cowardly and disloyal, but I have conquered myself. I will be true to the woman to whom I am pledged. You and I must not meet again. I will crush this madness to death. I think I have been delirious ever since that day I saw you first, Magdalen. My brain is clearer now. I see my duty, and I mean to do it at any cost. I dare not trust myself to say more. Magdalen, I have much for which to ask your forgiveness."
"There is nothing to forgive," she said steadily. "I have been as much to blame as you. If I had been as resolute as I ought to have been, if I had sent you away the second time as I did the first, this would not have come to pass. I have been weak too, and I deserve to atone for my weakness by suffering. There is only one path open to us. Esterbrook, good-bye." Her voice quivered with an uncontrollable spasm of pain, but the misty, mournful eyes did not swerve from his. The man stepped forward and caught her in his arms.
"Magdalen, good-bye, my darling. Kiss me once, only once, before I go."
She loosened his arms and stepped back proudly. "No, no man kisses my lips unless he is to be my husband. Good-bye, dear." He bowed his head silently and went away, looking back not once, else he might have seen her kneeling on the damp sand, weeping noiselessly and passionately. Marian Leslie looked at his pale, determined face the next evening, and read it like an open book. She had grown paler herself. There were purple shadows under the sweet violet eyes that might have hinted of her own sleepless nights. She greeted him calmly, holding out a steady, white hand of welcome. She saw the traces of the struggle through which he had passed, and knew that he had come off victor. The knowledge made her task a little harder. It would have been easier to let slip the straining cable than to cast it from her when it lay unresistingly in her hand. For an instant her heart thrilled with an unutterably sweet hope. Might he not forget in time? Need she snap in twain the weakened bond between them after all? Perhaps she might win back her lost sceptre, yet if— Womanly pride throttled the struggling hope. No divided allegiance, no hollow semblance of queenship for her. Her opportunity came when Esterbrook asked with grave earnestness if their marriage might not be hastened a little. Could he not have his bride in August? For a fleeting second Marian closed her eyes, and the slender hands, lying among the laces in her lap, clasped each other convulsively. Then she said quietly, "Sometimes I have thought, Esterbrook, that it might be better if we were never married at all." Esterbrook turned a startled face upon her.
"Not married at all? Marian, what do you mean?"
"Just what I say. I do not think we are as well suited to each other after all as we have fancied. We have loved each other as brother and sister might, and that is all. I think it will be best to be brother and sister forever. Nothing more."
Esterbrook sprang to his feet. "Marian, do you know what you are saying? You surely cannot have heard— No one could have told you—"
"I have heard nothing," she interrupted hurriedly. "No one has told me anything. I have only said what I have been thinking of late. I am sure we have made a mistake. It is not too late to remedy it. You will not refuse my request, Esterbrook? You will set me free?"
"Good heavens, Marian," he said hoarsely. "I cannot realize that you are in earnest. Have you ceased to care for me?"
The rigidly locked hands were clasped a little tighter. "No, I shall always care for you as my friend if you will let me. But I know we could not make each other happy. The time for that has gone by. I would never be satisfied, nor would you. Esterbrook, will you release me from a promise which has become an irksome fetter?" He looked down on her upturned face mistily. A great joy was surging up in his heart, yet it was mingled with great regret. He knew none better what was passing out of his life, what he was losing when he lost that pure womanly nature.
"If you really mean this, Marian," he said slowly, "if you really have come to feel that your truest love is not, and never can be mine, that I cannot make you happy, then there is nothing for me to do but to grant your request. You are free."
"Thank you, dear," she said gently as she stood up. She slipped his ring from her finger and held it out to him. He took it mechanically. He still felt dazed and unreal. Marian held out her hand. "Good night, Esterbrook," she said a little wearily. "I feel tired. I am glad you see it all in the same light as I do."
"Marian,"
he said earnestly, clasping the outstretched hand.
"Are you sure that you will be happy? Are you sure that you are doing a wise thing?"
"Quite sure," she answered, with a faint smile. "I am not acting rashly. I have thought it all over carefully. Things are much better so, dear. We will always be friends. Your joys and sorrows will be to me as my own. When another love comes to bless your life, Esterbrook, I will be glad. And now, good night. I want to be alone now."
At the doorway he turned to look back at her, standing in all her sweet stateliness in the twilight duskness, and the keen realization of all he had lost made him bow his head with a quick pang of regret. Then he went out into the darkness of the summer night. An hour later he stood alone on the little point where he had parted with Magdalen the night before. A restless night wind was moaning through the pines that fringed the bank behind him. The moon shone down radiantly, turning the calm expanse of the bay into a milk-white sheen. He took Marion's ring from his pocket and kissed it reverently. Then he threw it from him far out over the water. For a second the diamond flashed in the moonlight. Then, with a tiny splash, it fell among the ripples. Esterbrook turned his face to the cove, lying dark and silent in the curve between the crescent headlands. A solitary light glimmered from the low eaves of the Barrett cottage. "Tomorrow," was his unspoken thought, "I will be free to go back to Magdalen." End of A Strayed Allegiance.
The Beggar by Ivan Turgenev. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. I was walking along the street. I was stopped by a decrepit old beggar. Bloodshot, tearful eyes, blue lips, coarse rags, festering wounds. Oh, how hideously poverty had eaten into this miserable creature. He held out to me a red, swollen, filthy hand. He groaned. He mumbled of help. I began feeling in all my pockets. No purse, no watch, not even a handkerchief. I had taken nothing with me. And the beggar was still waiting. And his outstretched hand feebly shook and trembled. Confused, abashed, I warmly clasped the filthy, shaking hand. "Don't be angry, brother. I have nothing, brother." The beggar stared at me with his bloodshot eyes. His blue lips smiled, and he, in his turn, gripped my chilly fingers. "What of it, brother?" he mumbled. "Thanks for this, too." "That is a gift, too, brother." I knew that I, too, had received a gift from my brother. End of The Beggar, read by Theo Douglas, Seattle, Washington, June 2025.
Beyond the Ultraviolet by Frank M. Robinson. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Beyond the Ultraviolet by Frank M. Robinson. "You better take your money back, mister. Thanks a lot, but no thanks. I wasn't panhandling. My hat fell off and I was trying to find it on the sidewalk. Thanks again for finding it for me, but I think I could have managed. And no offense, but I can find my way all right without being led." "You're surprised that I'm rather young, huh? Well, youth isn't a crime, and anyways, 24 can be either young or old, depending on who you're talking to. But I know what you mean. I'm rather young for being blind, isn't that it? Most blind people you see in the streets are the old ones, the shabby ones with the pleading faces and the hat with the lead pencils in it, or maybe a tin cup and a violin. Sorry to disappoint you, but I guess I'm not the type. Sure, I know. You are only trying to help. You probably think I'm bitter because I can't see your world and all the wonderful things in it. Well, it's a long story, but that's not the punchline. I might be bitter, but not for the reasons you might think. Up until 2 weeks ago, I could see as well as you. And you couldn't call what happened losing my sight. Not exactly. So you're curious. You want to hear the rest of it. And you're sure it's not just out of sympathy. Well, all right. There's a bar in the next block where we can get a booth and a couple of beers. Now, look, I don't need to be led. You don't need eyes to find your way to a bar on a hot summer day like this. It's toward the end of the block, just a few steps further. Right here. There's a booth in the back where nobody will bother us for a while. Okay, make mine the same, and here's $50 to pay for them. Don't worry, I've got money enough to keep me in beer and pretzels for a long time. Nobody could accuse the professor of being stingy with the university funds when he paid me off. It began about 6 months ago. I was in my 3rd year at college, studying physics under Professor Martin. Maybe you've seen Martin around the campus, a rather thin guy with a face like the Rock of Gibraltar. One of the few profs who can still sound enthusiastic about their subject after 20 years of teaching it. The unit we were studying at the time was the one on light and physical optics, primarily a study of the spectrum stretching from X-rays beyond the ultraviolet to the visible spectrum, down to the infrared and radio waves, and the short waves used in television and radar. I had been absent from class a week, and on my return the professor invited me to dinner. After the dishes had been cleared away, he leaned back in his chair and lit what I took to be his usual after-dinner cigar. "I like to meet my students informally, Charles," he began. "Sorry that your wife couldn't come, but I understand well—" He let the sentence trail off. I sat there, feeling rather sick. It's one of those things you hope everybody has heard about so you don't have to explain, to sit and take their looks of pity and sympathy. Apparently the professor hadn't heard. "I'm sorry," I said. "I thought you knew. Both Alice and the baby died." The hand he held his cigar in quivered a little. "I'm sorry," he said, and mercifully dropped it there. Then he changed the subject to the one he had in mind when he had asked me to dinner. "Light, Charles, is such a large object, and, comparatively speaking, so little is known about it. But perhaps I know more than most. And if you wish, you can too. Would you like to see the world you live in, Charles? Not just the 0.1% that they call the visible spectrum, but all of it, the whole glorious universe of light." He took me into his confidence on his favorite research project, an attempt to see wavelengths other than those in the visible spectrum. His enthusiasm was catching, and there wasn't much hesitation. I signed the paper releasing the university from all responsibility in case of an accident. So easy to sign one's life away, though it wasn't actually my life, only my eyesight. The treatments began immediately. First, adaptation of vision to a dark room, like those used for flyers during the war. Then the drops of black liquid that the professor had invented, slowly spreading over the eyes, subtly altering the rods and cones of the retina, the nerve endings sensitive to light. And I began to live in a gradually fading world. Have you ever wondered what it's like to go blind? The increasing dusk and darkness around the edges of your vision, the little errors and mistakes that begin to crop up in everyday life, your blunder over a stool that you didn't quite see, your snubbing someone on the street whom you didn't recognize in time, the gradual awareness among your friends that something was wrong with your eyes, and their crude attempts to make it easier for you. For to all intents and purposes I was going blind. My range of vision remained the same, but it was shifting down the scale. The first colors to fade out of my vision were violet and blue and their tints. The sky overhead gradually became colorless. Magazine covers began to lose their appeal and slip into a bleak blending of yellows and reds. Then, slowly, the other colors began to grow dim and less distinct, until finally even red had faded from my sight. But there were other colors that replaced them, brilliant, scintillating colors that made seeing an adventure. Describe them to you? How could you describe red and green to a person who was blind from birth? How can I describe iridescent and violacine to you? Do you think you could understand? Do you think you could see what I mean? Oh, I could still get around in your world. I could still see people. All objects radiate heat, even ice. As an object's temperature goes up, the wavelength of the radiation given off goes up to the infrared, then into the visible. I could tell how hot water was by looking at it. I could see people by the heat they gave off, glowing figures moving down the street and around the lab. And still my range of vision shifted. Down to short waves and radio waves, the language of international communication, the wavelengths that continents and countries speak to each other in. Do you know how beautiful the aerial of your radio is? The different waves running down it like ripples across a pond? Have you ever seen the glorious pool of light around a radio broadcasting station? Have you ever marveled at the thin, trailing filaments of color tangling in the nest of television antennas that the city carries on its rooftops? The professor was worried, for along with losing my sight of this world, I began to lose interest in it. A truly blind man wouldn't, for he has nothing to replace vision with. He's still bound to the commonplace globe. He can improve his hearing or his sense of touch, but nothing replaces his sight. It was different with me. I was seeing something far more interesting than the dull, mundane world. They fixed a cot up for me in the laboratory. An experiment like myself was far too important to risk on the streets. Even then, I'd bump into tables or smash lab apparatus. I suppose an important experiment like I was should have taken care of itself, sort of like a self-lubricating motor. I'd cost the university lots of money, and I suppose I should have watched out for their investment, though I was probably the only one who didn't care what happened to me. There finally came a day when my eyes didn't change. I had reached a sticking point. The end of the spectrum? The professor said he didn't think so. I didn't think so either, for just beyond my range of vision seemed a hint of something else. I caught glimpses of something, I couldn't make out exactly what. There seemed to be vague suggestions of form and color and life, indistinct figures that capered and grimaced just beyond my view. There was nothing definite, nothing that I could draw a picture of and describe like you could an automobile or a building. There were just suggestions, a feeling of something more. There was a hint of life in the masses of winking light that beckoned and burned. The next day, the professor brought my eyes back to normal. Familiar objects had a sudden fascination that quickly faded when I had regained normal vision for an hour or so. It was a prosaic world once again. Radios and aerials were just cabinets of wood and plastic and glass tubes and strips of rusty wire and metal. I wasn't sure the experiment was over. I asked the professor if there was anything that would take me further along the scale, beyond perhaps even the spectrum as we know it. He twisted his hands nervously behind his back and walked over and looked out the laboratory window. "I could do it for you, Charles, but I'm not sure that I could bring you back. Your eyes would be stranded in that world of yours. You could never look at ours again." He turned from the window and faced me. "Why don't you forget it for a few weeks, and then come back here, and if you still want to, we'll continue the experiment?" I agreed and left. I spent the next 2 weeks doing nothing but looking at our world. Do you think you really appreciate your sight? If you knew you had but a few weeks of sight left, what would you do with it? Visit famous landmarks? See the country? If you thought about it, I think you'd do the same as I did. I began to enjoy what was close at hand, the surroundings I had lived in. Everyday sights held a certain fascination for me. The stark black and white mosaic of a city at the tag end of winter, the sheer raucous color of the magazines at your local newsstand, the smooth patterns of hues and tints in a department store window display. And how much do you appreciate springtime? The few weeks of the year when the city loses its look of drabness and little plots of grass and flowers add color to it, like brilliant strips of cloth in a dirty patchwork quilt. Then there were the kids roller skating down the sidewalks, the girls' pigtails flying and the boys' knickers flapping in the breeze. And later on, in the business blocks, the soft glow of neon against the swirling fog of a warm spring night. That was the last spring I'll ever see. I'll be able to smell the flowers and feel the warmth of the sun and run my fingers through the green grass, but I'll never see it again. After the few weeks were up, I returned to the professor, still curious about what lay beyond the spectrum limits. There were the eye washes and the drops, and then the heavy strips of white cloth wrapped around my head, keeping your world out and bounding mine with a rim of black. My last look at the world was of some kids playing in the city streets, and some breadcrumbs spread out on the windowsill for the birds. After that, a quick view of the lab, a jungle of grass retorts and vats filled with oily chemicals, and a close-up of Professor Martin's gnarled hands holding the bandages for my eyes. I lay on the cot in the lab for the next few days, listening to your world and feeling it and remembering it, the good and the bad, the adventuresome and the dull. I could hear the newsboy hawking his papers, and the shouts of the kids and the clatter of the Main Street trolley. I could smell the factory smoke and the heavy animal odor drifting up from the stockyards. I could hear the people in the lab, and Professor Martin scurrying about, asking me how I felt, and toward the end telling me that in a few hours the bandages would come off. 2 weeks ago, the professor came into the lab and started tearing at the adhesive, stripping away the layers of white cloth. Even when he had the bandages all the way off, I kept my eyes closed, almost afraid to open them. My eyes had to focus first. Everything was so damned brilliant and indistinct. Then my sight cleared, and suddenly everything was very plain. Well, that's about it. There isn't much more to tell. It hasn't been too boring to listen to me for 15 minutes, has it? I can tell you haven't been too bored because you haven't touched your beer, have you? It's getting warm, and you know what they say about warm beer. What did I see? You really want to know, don't you? Well, I've tried to rationalize it and explain it, and I suppose I can, in a dim way. Put it this way. I'm totally blind now. What's bright to you is black to me. But I'm not bitter because I can't see your world, and I can't describe to you what I saw because, you see, I don't remember. Perhaps it's merciful, I don't know. I can only guess from what the professor told me. Professor Martin had stripped the bandages from my eyes, and he and a few assistants saw my eyes blur and finally focus on something in a different world from theirs. And then, before I fainted, I screamed the one word that none of them would ever forget. Alice! End of Beyond the Ultraviolet by Frank M. Robinson. Recording by Roger Melin.
The Dog by Ivan Turgenev. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. Us two in the room, my dog and me. Outside, a fearful storm is howling. The dog sits in front of me and looks me straight in the face. And I, too, look into his face. He wants, it seems, to tell me something. He is dumb. He is without words. He does not understand himself. But I understand him. I understand that at this instant there is living in him and in me the same feeling, that there is no difference between us. We are the same. In each of us there burns and shines the same trembling spark. Death sweeps down with a wave of its chill, broad wing, and the end. Who then can discern what was the spark that glowed in each of us? No, we are not beast and man that glance at one another. They are the eyes of equals, those eyes riveted on one another. And in each of these, in the beast and in the man, the same life huddles up in fear, close to the other. End of The Dog, read by Theo Douglas, Seattle, Washington, June 2025. The End of the World, A Dream, by Ivan Turgenev. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. I fancied I was somewhere in Russia, in the wilds, in a simple country house, the room big and low-pitched with 3 windows, the walls whitewashed, no furniture. Before the house, a barren plain, gradually sloping downwards. It stretches into the distance. A gray, monotonous sky hangs over it, like the canopy of a bed. I am not alone. There are some 10 persons in the room with me, all quite plain people, simply dressed. They walk up and down in silence, as it were, stealthily. They avoid one another, and yet are continually looking anxiously at one another. Not one knows why he has come into this house, and what people they are with him. On all the faces, uneasiness and despondency. All in turn approach the windows and look about intently, as though expecting something from without. Then again they fall to wandering up and down. Among us is a small-sized boy. From time to time he whimpers in the same thin voice, "Father, I'm frightened." My heart turns sick at his whimper, and I too began to be afraid. Of what? I don't know myself, only I feel there is coming nearer and nearer a great, great calamity. The boy keeps on and on with his wail. Oh, to escape from here! How stifling! How weary! How heavy! But escape is impossible. That sky is like a shroud, and no wind. Is the air dead or what? All at once, the boy runs up to the window and shrieks in the same piteous voice, "Look, look, the earth has fallen away." How? Fallen away? Yes. Just now there was a plain before the house, and now it stands on a fearful height. The horizon has sunk, has gone down, and from the very house drops an almost overhanging, as it were scooped out, black precipice. We all crowded to the window. Horror froze our hearts. "Here it is, here it is," whispers one next me, and behold, along the whole far boundary of the earth, something began to stir. Some sort of small, roundish hillocks began heaving and falling. It is the sea. The thought flashed on us all at the same instant. It will swallow us all up directly. Only how can it grow and rise upwards to this precipice? And yet it grows enormously. Already there are not separate hillocks heaving in the distance. One continuous, monstrous wave embraces the whole circle of the horizon. It is swooping down upon us. In an icy hurricane it flies, swirling in the darkness of hell. Everything shuddered, and there, in this flying mass, was the crash of thunder, the iron wail of thousands of throats. Ah, what a roaring and moaning! It was the earth howling for terror. The end of it, the end of all. The child whimpered once more. I tried to clutch at my companions, but already we were all crushed, buried, drowned, swept away by that pitch-black, icy, thundering wave. Darkness, darkness everlasting. Scarcely breathing, I awoke. End of The End of the World, A Dream. Read by Theo Douglas. Seattle, Washington, June 2025.
The Galactic Ghost by Mark Reynolds. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Read by Kaitlyn Vanadestine. The Galactic Ghost. Gracefully, quietly it came, landing on a deserted New Jersey field. Wonder and fear struck at the bowels of the Earth people, not because of the ship itself, but because of its strange message. Despite the widely publicized radar posts encircling our nation and the continuously alerted jet squadrons at its border, the spaceship was about to land before it was detected. It settled gracefully, quietly, onto an empty field in northern New Jersey, and so unexpected was the event, so unbelievable the fact that man was being visited by aliens from space, that it was a full half-hour before the first extra was on the streets in New York, and 40 minutes before the news buzzed through the Kremlin. It might have taken considerably longer for man in Earth's more isolated areas to hear of the event, had not the alien taken a hand at this point. Approximately an hour after the landing, into the mind of every human on Earth, irrespective of nation, language, age, or intellect, came the thought telepathically, "We come in peace. Prepare to receive our message." It was a month before the message came. During that period, more than 99% of the Earth's population became aware of the visitor from space. Radio, television, newsreel, telegraph, and newspapers reached the greater number, but word of mouth and even throbbing drums played their part. In 4 weeks, savages along the Amazon and shepherds in Xinjiang knew the visitors from the stars had arrived with a message for man. And all awaited the message: scientist and soldier, politician and revolutionist, millionaire and vagrant, bishop and whirling dervish, banker and pickpocket, society matron and streetwalker. And each was hoping for one thing and afraid he'd hear another. All efforts at communication with the alien ship had failed. The various welcoming delegations from the state of New Jersey, from the United States, and even from the United Nations were ignored. No sign of life aboard was evident, and there seemed no means of entrance to the spacecraft. It sat there impassively. Its tremendous saucer-like shape seemed almost like a beautiful monument. At the end of a month, when worldwide interest in the visitor from space was at its height, the message came, and once again it was impressed upon the mind of every human being on Earth. Man, know this. Your world is fated to complete destruction. Ordinarily, we of the Galactic Union would not have contacted man until he had progressed much further and was ready to take his place among us. But this emergency makes necessary that we take immediate steps if your kind is to be saved from complete obliteration. In order to preserve your race, we are making efforts to prepare another planet, an uninhabited one, to receive your colonist. Unfortunately, our means for transporting you to your new world are limited. Only a handful can be taken. You are safe for another 5 of your Earth years. At the end of that period, we will return. Have 1,000 of your people ready for their escape. The President of the United States lifted an eyebrow warily and rapped again for order. Gentlemen, please, let us get back to the fundamental question. Summed up, it amounts to this. Only 1,000 persons out of a world population of approximately 2 billions are going to be able to escape the Earth's destruction. In other words, 1 out of every 2 million. It is going to be most difficult to choose. Herr Ernst Oberfeld tapped his glasses fretfully on the conference table. Mr. President, it need not be quite as bad as all that. After all, we must choose the Earth's best specimens to carry on our race. I believe we will find that the combined populations of Europe and North America total somewhat less than 1 billion. If we go still further and eliminate all inferior... Monsieur Pierre Duclos flushed. Herr Oberfeld should keep in mind that his presence at this meeting at all was opposed vigorously by some of the delegates. Isn't it somewhat too soon after his country's debacle to again broadcast its super-race theories? The British representative spoke up. My dear Duclos, although I agree with you completely in essence, still it must be pointed out that if we were to handle this allocation on a strictly numerical basis, that our Chinese friends would be allotted something like 200 colonists, while Great Britain would have perhaps 20. Maxim Gregoroff grunted. Hardly enough for the royal family, eh? Lord Harriman was on his feet. Sir, I might echo what Monsieur Duclos has said to Herr Oberfeld. It was in spite of the protest from a considerable number of delegates to this conference that your nation is represented at all. Gregoroff's fist thumped on the table and his face went beet red. It is as expected. You plan to monopolize the escape ship for the imperialistic nations. The atom bomb will probably be used to destroy all other countries. The President of the United States held up his hand. This whole thing was getting more chaotic by the minute. As a matter of fact, instructions from Congress were that he explained that the United States expected to have at least 1/3 of the total. This, in view of the fact that the aliens had landed in New Jersey, obviously seeing that the United States was the foremost nation of the world, and further in view of the fact that this country was a melting pot of all nations and consequently produced what might be called the average member of the human race. However, that would have to wait. Order had to be brought to this conference if anything was to be accomplished. Gentlemen, gentlemen, please, he called. These accusations, we are getting nowhere. I have taken the liberty to make arrangements to have the representative of the newly formed Congress of American Sciences address you. Are you agreeable? He raised his eyebrows inquiringly and, meeting no objection, pressed the button on the table before him. Professor Minklethorpe was ushered in, bobbed his head to the assembled delegates, and came to the point immediately. The problem which you are discussing has many ramifications. I would like to bring to your attention a few which should be examined with care. First, the choice of colonists must not be on a national basis, nor on one based upon political or monetary prominence. If it is, we, as a race, are doomed. This new planet, no matter how well prepared for us by the Galactic Union, is going to be a challenge such as man has never faced before. This challenge cannot be met by politicians, no matter how glib, nor by wealthy men, no matter how many dollars they possess, nor by titled ones, no matter how old and honored their names. We must pick trained specialists who will be able to meet the problems that arise in the new world. Our Congress recommends that all persons of all nations who have college degrees be given thorough tests both for IQ and for accumulated knowledge, and that the highest 1,000 be chosen irrespective of nation or race. Pandit Harry Kuanai smiled quietly. May I ask the learned professor a question? Of course, that is why I am here. We want only to have this matter decided on a strictly scientific basis. My poverty-stricken country has a population of possibly 1/5 of the world total, but fewer university men than one of your large cities might boast. Your desire to choose men by their IQ has its merits, but I have no doubt that in my country we have men of tremendous intelligence who cannot even read or write, aside from having a university degree. Must my widely illiterate people go unrepresented in the New World? A muscle twitched in the professor's face. Needless to say, the Congress of American Sciences has considered that. However, we must view this matter in a spirit of sacrifice. The best of the world's population must go to the New World. Possibly whole nations will go without representation. It is too bad, but unfortunately necessary. Sven Karlsson put up his finger for recognition. It seems to me that there is another serious loophole in the professor's recommendation. He wants the 1,000 to be made up of university graduates of high IQ and considerable accumulated knowledge. I am afraid I foresee the New World being populated with elderly scholars. He smiled, like the professor himself, who I understand has a phenomenal IQ. Monsieur Duclos nodded. He is right. We must consider the need to send perfect physical specimens. He looked down at his own small and bent body. Gentlemen, he said wryly, has it occurred to you that none of us here at this conference are suitable to be represented among the 1,000? They ignored him. A pale-faced delegate in black, who had thus far said nothing, spoke up softly. I have been instructed to inform you that our organization demands that all of the colonists be of the true faith. His words were drowned by the shouting of 6 of the conference delegates. Loud above them all could be heard the bellow of Maxim Gregorov. Our union now includes the population of approximately half the world. Our allotment, consequently, will be 500 colonists of the 1,000. We will choose them by our own methods. Lord Harriman murmured, undoubtedly by starting at the top of the party membership list and taking the first 500 names beginning with your leader. The President of the United States ran his hand through his hair and then roughly down the side of his face. A messenger handed him a slip of paper. He read it and intensified his pounding on the table. Gentlemen, he shouted, if Professor Minklethorpe is through, we have here a request from the International Physical Culture Society to have their representative heard. I know, Sven Karlsson said. He wants all of the colonists to be able to chin themselves 25 times as the first requisite. At the end of the 5-year period, the spaceship came again, settling into the identical field where it had first landed. This time, a delegation awaited it, and a multitude that stretched as far as the eye could see. A telepathic message came from the visitor from space almost immediately. Choose from your number 3 representatives to discuss the situation with us. Within 10 minutes, 3 advanced and entered the ship by way of a port that opened before them as they approached. Among their number was Pierre Duclos. A passage stretched before them, and seeing no one, they hesitated a moment before following it to its further end. Monsieur Duclos led the way, depending only slightly on his cane to aid his bent body. A door opened, and they were confronted by the figure of a man seated at a desk. It was several moments before they realized that the entity before them was masked so cleverly that they had been led to believe him human. He said in faultless English, I note that you have penetrated my disguise. I thought it would be easier for you if I hid my true appearance. Until your people are used to alien life forms, I must use this measure. Monsieur Duclos bowed. We appreciate your consideration, but I assure you that The alien waved a gloved hand. Please, no argument. My appearance would probably nauseate you, but it is of no importance. Pray be seated. He noted the cane and nodded to the little Frenchman. You, sir, must be highly thought of to rate being chosen one of the 1,000 in view of your age and health. Although he was not at ease in the presence of the representative of the Galactic Union, Monsieur Duclos allowed himself a wry smile. You must understand. I am not one of the colonists. My presence here at this meeting is an honor that has been awarded me in return for some small services in aiding in the selection of the favored ones. And what were those services? Of no real importance. I suppose you might say that the most important was that I was the first to refuse to be a colonist. Bentley, one of the other Earthmen, spoke up. Had it not been for Pierre Duclos, it is doubtful if the 1,000 would have been chosen, and even possible that there would be no Earth to which to return for your colonists. Behind the mask, the eyes of the alien gleamed. Enlighten me further, please. Duclos simmered. You honor me overmuch, Mr. Bentley. Let us approach the problem of the colonists and their transportation. But John Bentley went on. For more than 2 years after your ship's departure, complete confusion reigned in regard to selection of the 1,000. Happily, all-out warfare between nations had been avoided, although conditions were rapidly coming to a point where it was momentarily expected. Each race, each nation, each religion, even each sex, thought they should have the greater representation, and each of these groups in turn were divided into subgroups by wealth, age, class, education, and others. Almost everyone on Earth knew of some reason why he should be one of the colonists, and most of us were willing to take any steps to make our desire come true. The alien said, That was to be expected, and then Pierre Duclos formed his Society of Racial Preservation, whose first requisite for membership was a refusal to become one of the colonists. The purpose of the organization was to find the 1,000 most suitable colonists without regard to race, nationality, creed, color, education, class, wealth, or any other grouping. At first, the growth of membership was slow, but after a time, man saw that his chance of survival as an individual was practically nil, that his chance of being chosen was at best less than 1 in 2 million. When he realized this, his next desire was to make sure that, even though he as an individual was doomed, the race survived. Membership in the society grew rapidly and internationally. The members, you might say, were fanatical. Why not? They knew that they had less than 5 years to live. Why not sacrifice those last years of life to such a noble cause? As the society grew in strength, nothing could stand before it. Governments that stood in the way were overthrown, social systems abolished, prejudices and institutions that had stood for centuries were wiped out. It became necessary to institute world government to guarantee to all equal opportunity. Step by step, the society took the measures necessary to ensure the selection of the best specimens Earth had to offer. And scientific development was pushed to the utmost. We wished to send our colonists off with as much as Earth could possibly give them. We eliminated a dozen diseases that have plagued us for centuries. We devised 1,000 new tools and techniques. In short, said the alien, because of this stimulus, man has progressed as much in this past few years as he could have expected in the next 50. That is correct, Pierre Duclos said. It is unfortunate that now we have on our threshold a world really worth living in, that it is fated to be destroyed. I see, said the alien. What would have been a smile on a human face flickered on his. I am glad to report that the danger which confronted the Earth has been removed, and the need to populate the new planet with colonists in order to preserve your race is now eliminated. Gentlemen, the Earth is safe. Man may go on with his plans without fear of destruction. Monsieur Duclos fingered his cane thoughtfully while the other 2 Earthmen jumped to their feet, thumped each other's backs, shouted, and otherwise demonstrated their joy. They finally dashed from the room and from the spacecraft to give the news to the world. The alien eyed the little Frenchman. And why have you remained? I do not believe the world was faced with destruction, monsieur. I have come to the conclusion that you have perpetrated a farce upon mankind. The alien sat himself down at the desk again. I see you will need an explanation, but you are wrong, you know. Faced with destruction you were. The destruction, however, was not a matter of collision with some other body or whatever you might have imagined. The destruction would have come from within. Man was on the verge of destroying himself. 1 more conflict, or at most 2, would have done it. The Galactic Union has long been aware of man who has developed mechanically in a phenomenal manner, but has not been able to develop socially to the point where his science is less than a danger. This ship was sent to you in hopes of accomplishing exactly what has been accomplished. We believed your racial instinct would be strong enough to unite you when the race as a whole thought it was threatened with extinction. The alien got to his feet. I am afraid we must leave now. Let me say that I hope that man will soon be able to take his place in the Galactic Union. Monsieur Duclos winced. The Galactic Union, he said. The League of Nations and the United Nations were bad enough. He smiled wryly. And I thought that with the establishment of a world government, we had abolished such conferences forever. I can just see myself as the first delegate from Earth. Heaven forbid. End of The Galactic Ghost.
A Gentle Complaint by Francis M. Whitcher. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A Gentle Complaint. Fairfield, Connecticut, P.T. Barnum, Esquire. Dear Sir, we have a large, soiled Asiatic elephant visiting us now, which we suspect belongs to you. His skin is a misfit, and he keeps moving his trunk from side to side nervously. If you have missed an elephant answering to this description, please come up and take him away, as we have no use for him. An elephant on a place so small as ours is more of a trouble than a convenience. I have endeavored to frighten him away, but he does not seem at all timid, and my wife and I, assisted by our hired man, tried to push him out of the yard, but our efforts were unavailing. He has made our home his own now for some days, and has become quite de trop. We do not mind him so much in the daytime, for then he basks mostly on the lawn and plays with the children, to whom he has greatly endeared himself. But at night he comes up and lays his head on our piazza, and his deep and stertorous breathing keeps my wife awake. I feel as though I were entitled to some compensation for his keep. He is a large, though not fastidious eater, and he has destroyed some of my plants by treading on them. And he also leaned against our woodhouse. My neighbor, who is something of a wag, says I have a lien on his trunk for the amount of his board, but that, of course, is only pleasantry. Your immediate attention will oblige. Simeon Ford. End of A Gentle Complaint. Read by Anthony St. Pierre, Toronto, March 2025. He Rose to the Occasion by Francis M. Whitcher. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. He Rose to the Occasion. Several years ago, there labored in one of the western villages of Minnesota a preacher who was always in the habit of selecting his texts from the Old Testament, and particularly some portion of the history of Noah. No matter what the occasion was, he would always find some parallel incident from the history of this great character that would readily serve as a text or illustration. At one time he was called upon to unite the daughter of the village mayor and a prominent attorney in the holy bonds of matrimony. Two little boys, knowing his determination to give them a portion of the sacred history touching Noah's marriage, hit upon the novel idea of pasting together two leaves in the family Bible so as to connect, without any apparent break, the marriage of Noah and the description of the Ark of the Covenant. When the noted guests were all assembled, and the contracting parties with attendants in their respective stations, the preacher began the ceremonies by reading the following text. And when Noah was 140 years old, he took unto himself a wife. Then, turning the page, he continued, 300 cubits in length, 50 cubits in width, and 30 cubits in depth, and within and without besmeared with pitch. The story seemed a little strong, but he could not doubt the Bible, and after reading it once more and reflecting a moment, he turned to the startled assemblage with these remarks. My beloved brethren, this is the first time in the history of my life that my attention has been called to this important passage of the Scriptures. But it seems to me that it is one of the most forcible illustrations of that grand eternal truth, that the nature of woman is exceedingly difficult to comprehend. End of He Rose to the Occasion. Read by Anthony St. Pierre, Toronto, March 2025.
The Man Who Knew Gods by Clarence Day, Jr. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. Read by Tom Merritt. The Man Who Knew Gods. His case illustrated the risks explorers run. Not the physical risks, which are overestimated, but the psychological dangers. For years he had lived among savages, observing their ways, and owing to this, he had fallen into a completely detached mental habit. When he returned to civilization, he had become a confirmed looker-on. He couldn't get back into touch with us. He remained an outsider. I met him but once myself. I was in the publishing business at the time, and hearing that this man was in New York, I thought I might as well see him about his next book. Telephoning him, therefore, at his hotel, I asked him to dine with me on the following Friday. "Friday," he replied. "What is Friday?" He spoke English perfectly. "It is the 26th, I answered. He said, "The 26th what?" "Oh, I know," he continued. "Friday is a day of the week." "Thank you very much, but I do not keep track of my dinners so carefully as that." This rather odd answer I passed over at the moment, thinking I had misunderstood him, and we arranged that he would come some day to my office instead after lunch. The next that I heard, he had called there at 4:45, the hour at which I always leave. My secretary explained to him that I had gone. He looked at my desk, on which lay some unfinished business, and said to my secretary, "Why?" The man courteously responded, "Because it is 4:45. The explorer thereat laughed weirdly and went off. I now perceived I had to deal with a most eccentric character. But that being a necessary evil in the publishing business, I went to his hotel at 9 o'clock that evening. I found him down in the restaurant, eating oatmeal and succotash, and we then and there had the following extravagant interview, which I give without comment. "The book I mean to write," he said, staring at me, "is a study of actual religions. Other writers have told the world what men of all countries suppose their religions to be. I shall tell what they really are." I said that our house would prefer an account of his travels, but he paid no attention. "Men's real religions," he announced, "are unknown to themselves. You may have heard of the Guam Islanders," he leisurely continued. "They, for instance, would tell you that their deity was an idol called Bashwa, a large crumbling stone thing which stands in a copperwood forest. They worship this idol most faithfully on the first of each lunar month. No Guam Islander would ever acknowledge he had any other god but Bashwa. But a stranger soon notices that in every hut and cave in that country, hanging beside the water jar, is a long sleeping mat, and on that mat a rough pattern is drawn like a face. 'What is that?' I asked them. 'That? Oh, that's Gil,' they answered in an offhand, careless way, without any of the reverence they would have used if they had thought Gil a god. But nevertheless I noted that everywhere throughout that whole island submissive remarks about Gil were far more numerous than those about Bashwa. That made me begin collecting those references, and presently I found that most things of which that tribe approved were spoken of as being Gil, or very Gil, and things they didn't like were damned as Nagil. It was a little difficult to understand their exact conception of Gil, but apparently it typified the hut, or the hut point of view. Marriage was Gil, and good manners and building materials, because they all made for hut life. Inhospitality was Nagil, and the infidelity of women, and earthquakes and leaks. They sometimes personified Gil, and talked of him as he. Gil loves not Wisha, the wind. Gil comforts the weary. Gil says, "Get more children." But all this was only in their fanciful moments. At other times, Gil was merely the mat that they slept on. When I said to them, "Gil is your real god," they laughed at my stupidity, good-humoredly, as though there were something perhaps in my idea, yet with a complacent assurance that I was preposterous. I did not argue with them. One couldn't, you know. I simply continued my observations, corroborating my theory at every turn. To give you an instance, Bourgeois is supposed to think highly of hunters and sailors, and the Wam folk always profess to think highly of them too. That attitude, however, is only official, not real. Very few of them actually become sailors. The life is na Gil. He came to a pause. "I wonder whether we too have a Gil," I said, to humor him. "We shall have to ask some of your Wam folk to come here and tell us." The explorer looked me over as though he were continuing his observations of my manners and customs. "Yes," he said, "there is a white man's Gil." I regretted having mentioned it. "Can't you guess what he is?" he inquired. I say he because, like the Wam Gil, he is sometimes personified. Come now, apply the test. He doesn't typify the Wam Islander point of view. He isn't a mat. But examine your huts and your conversation, and you will easily spot him. No, I'm not talking of money or power or success. You may bow down to these, but not blindly. You at least know what you are doing. The worship of a Gil is unconscious, and hence more insidious. Even when an explorer points it out, you won't see its importance. It will seem insignificant to you. And yet, while the Bourgeois to whom you build temples is only occasionally deferred to, this Gil of yours sways you in all things. He is the first whom you think of when you rise, and the last when you go to bed. You speak of your Gil hourly, or oftener, all day long. Those of you who heed him too little are disapproved of by everybody, while the American who succeeds in life is the man who is most careful of Gil. I have habits, he morosely continued, of doing certain things, eating my meals, for instance, at quite different hours from those that are prevalent here. I find that everyone who hears of this is surprised at my ways. Their attitude, while not openly intolerant, is distinctly disapproving. When I ask them why, I get no answer, no rational answer. They say simply, "It's the wrong time." Following up this clue, I have noticed that not only is the time for performing an act supposed to be sometimes wrong and sometimes right, but that the idea of time governs all of you like an absolute tyrant. Even your so-called freethinkers who lead a life without God never dream of daring to live without a clock and a calendar. And just as the Wam folk are unconsciously obsessed by their hut thought and see everything from that angle, so you have drifted into an exaggerated preoccupation with time. No matter what you may want to do, you first look at your clock to see if it is the right time for doing it. If it isn't, you wait. You feel that you ought to, and each caste among you has its own hours. A difference of 30 minutes in the hour at which a family has dinner marks a difference in their social scale. There isn't time, you sigh submissively, when you give up something you'd like to do. Time is money, is one of your phrases. Give me time is your prayer. Your big books of maxims are full of the respect you feel toward him. The greatest crime is loss of time. Time flies. Time waits for no man. These are only small instances, but their total effect is not small, for it is life itself that you sacrifice to this fetish. Your Gil actually won't let you take full drafts of existence. He keeps you so busy dividing it into months, days, and minutes. You imagine that it is because you lead crowded lives that you do it. But it is because you're always thinking of time that you lead crowded lives. You are smiling at me good-humoredly, my friend. I see that, like the Guam Islanders, you think I am preposterous. It is the old story. You cannot view yourself from without. You will admit that considerations of time enter into all your acts, and yet this seems trivial, and it is inconceivable to you that you are its slaves. My dear sir, I interposed, a strict observance of the laws of time enables a man to live a much fuller life. It is what all devotees say of gods, he murmured. We are not its slaves, I continued. That's absurd. We have only a sensible regard for it, as every one must. Ah, he cried. But you do not say one must when your bourgeois speaks. Your bourgeois thinks highly of those who do good works without ceasing. You profess to think highly of them too. That is your official attitude. In reality, how very few of you lead that life. It happens to be na-gil, you see. You haven't the time. Look about you if you would convince yourself. The concrete evidence alone is enough. On the breast or the wrist of your women, and in every man's pocket, you see a Gil amulet, a watch, to remind them of time every hour. What other god was ever so faithfully worshipped? In every hut in the land you will find his altar, and in your large huts you will find one in every principal room. No matter how free and unconventional their owners may be, no matter how those rooms may vary in their arrangements or furnishings, there stands always in the most prominent place the thing called the mantle. On it, ceremonially flanked by 2 candlesticks or vases, sits Gil, the timepiece. And his is the face of all others you most frequently consult. Blind and idolatrous tradesman, time is your deity. Well, that's all there was to our interview, for at that point he came to a pause and I rose to leave, explaining to him soothingly, though I must confess it had a strangely opposite effect, that I had to go because it was getting late. End of The Man Who Knew Gods.
The Monk by Ivan Turgenev. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. I used to know a monk, a hermit, a saint. He lived only for the sweetness of prayer, and steeping himself in it, he would stand so long on the cold floor of the church that his legs below the knees grew numb and senseless, as blocks of wood. He did not feel them. He stood on and prayed. I understood him, and perhaps envied him. But let him, too, understand me, and not condemn me. Me, for whom his joys are inaccessible. He has attained to annihilating himself, his hateful ego. But I, too. It's not from egoism I pray not. My ego, may be, is even more burdensome and more odious to me than his to him. He has found wherein to forget himself. But I, too, find the same, though not so continuously. He does not lie, but neither do I. End of The Monk. Read by Theo Douglas. Seattle, Washington, June 2025.
Music Pounding by Oliver Wendell Holmes. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Music Pounding. The old master was talking about a concert he had been to hear. "I don't like your chopped music anyway. That woman, she had more sense in her little finger than 40 medical societies, Florence Nightingale, says that the music you pour out is good for sick folks, and the music you pound out isn't. Not that exactly, but something like it. I have been to hear some music pounding. It was a young woman with as many white muslin flounces round her as the planet Saturn has rings that did it. She gave the music stool a twirl or two and fluffed down on it like a whirl of soap suds in a hand basin. Then she pushed up her cuffs as if she was going to fight for the champion's belt. Then she worked her wrists and her hands, to limber 'em, I suppose, and spread out her fingers till they looked as though they would pretty much cover the keyboard from the growling end to the little squeaky one. Then those two hands of hers made a jump at the keys as if there were a couple of tigers coming down on a flock of black and white sheep, and the piano gave a great howl as if its tail had been trod on. Dead stop. So still you could hear your hair growing. Then another jump, and another howl, as if the piano had two tails and you had trod on both of them at once. And then a grand clatter and scramble and string of jumps, up and down, back and forward, one hand over the other, like a stampede of rats and mice, more than like anything I call music. I like to hear a woman sing. I like to hear a fiddle sing. But these noises they hammer out of their wood and ivory anvils, don't talk to me. I know the difference between a bullfrog and a wood thrush. End of Music Pounding. Read by Anthony St. Pierre. Toronto, March 2025.
Romance in the Roaring Forties by Damon Runyon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Romance in the Roaring Forties. Only a rank sucker will think of taking 2 peeks at Dave the Dude's doll, because while Dave may stand for the first peek, figuring it is a mistake, it is a sure thing he will get soared up at the second peek, and Dave the Dude is certainly not a man to have soared up on you. But this Waldo Winchester is 100% sucker, which is why he takes quite a number of peeks at Dave's doll. And what is more, she takes quite a number of peeks right back at him. And there you are. When a guy and a doll get to taking peeks back and forth at each other, why, there you are indeed. This Waldo Winchester is a nice-looking young guy who writes pieces about Broadway for the Morning Item. He writes pieces about the goings-on in nightclubs, such as fights and one thing and another, and also about who is running around with who, including guys and dolls. Sometimes this is very embarrassing to people who may be married and are running around with people who are not married, but of course Waldo Winchester cannot be expected to ask one and all for their marriage certificates before he writes his pieces for the paper. The chances are, if Waldo Winchester knows Miss Billy Perry is Dave the Dude's doll, he will never take more than his first peek at her. But nobody tips him off until after his second or third peek, and by this time Miss Billy Perry is taking her peeks back at him, and Waldo Winchester is hooked. In fact, he is plumb gone. And being a sucker, like I tell you,
he does not care whose doll she is. Personally, I do not blame him much, for Miss Billy Perry is worth a few peeks, especially when she is out on the floor of Miss Missouri Martin's 1600 Club doing her tap dance. Still, I do not think the best tap dancer that ever lives can make me take 2 peeks at her if I know she is Dave the Dude's doll, for Dave somehow thinks more than somewhat of his dolls. He especially thinks plenty of Miss Billy Perry, and sends her fur coats and diamond rings, and one thing and another, which she sends back to him at once, because it seems she does not take presents from guys. This is considered most surprising all along Broadway, but people figure the chances are she has some other angle. Anyway, this does not keep Dave the Dude from liking her just the same, and so she is considered his doll by one and all, and is respected accordingly, until this Waldo Winchester comes along. It happens that he comes along while Dave the Dude is off in the Modoc on a little run down to the Bahamas to get some goods for his business, such as scotch and champagne, and by the time Dave gets back, Miss Billy Perry and Waldo Winchester are at the stage where they sit in corners between her numbers and hold hands. Of course, nobody tells Dave the Dude about this, because they do not wish to get him excited. Not even Miss Missouri Martin tells him, which is most unusual, because Miss Missouri Martin, who is sometimes called Mizzou for short, tells everything she knows as soon as she knows it, which is very often before it happens. You see, the idea is when Dave the Dude is excited, he may blow somebody's brains out, and the chances are it will be nobody's brains but Waldo Winchester's, although some claim that Waldo Winchester has no brains, or he will not be hanging around Dave the Dude's doll. I know Dave is very, very fond of Miss Billy Perry, because I hear him talk to her several times, and he is most polite to her, and never gets out of line in her company by using cuss words or anything like this. Furthermore, one night, when One-Eyed Solly Abrahams is a little stewed up, he refers to Miss Billy Perry as a broad, meaning no harm whatever, for this is the way many of the boys speak of the dolls. But right away, Dave the Dude reaches across the table and bops One-Eyed Solly right in the mouth. So everybody knows from then on that Dave thinks well of Miss Billy Perry. Of course, Dave is always thinking fairly well of some doll as far as this goes, but it is seldom he gets to bopping guys in the mouth over them. Well, one night what happens but Dave the Dude walks into the 1600 Club, and there in the entrance, what does he see? But this Waldo Winchester and Miss Billy Perry kissing each other back and forth very friendly. Right away, Dave reaches for the old equalizer to shoot Waldo Winchester. But it seems Dave does not happen to have the old equalizer with him, not expecting to have to shoot anybody this particular evening. So Dave the Dude walks over and, as Waldo Winchester hears him coming and lets go his stranglehold on Miss Billy Perry, Dave nails him with a big right hand on the chin. I will say for Dave the Dude that he is a fair puncher with his right hand, though his left is not so good, and he knocks Waldo Winchester bow-legged. In fact, Waldo folds right up on the floor. Well, Miss Billy Perry lets out a screech you can hear clear to the battery, and runs over to where Waldo Winchester lights, and falls on top of him, squalling very loud. All anybody can make out of what she says is that Dave the Dude is a big bum, although Dave is not so big at that, and that she loves Waldo Winchester. Dave walks over and starts to give Waldo Winchester the leather, which is considered customary in such cases, but he seems to change his mind, and instead of booting Waldo around, Dave turns and walks out of the joint, looking very black and mad, and the next anybody hears of him, he is over in the chicken club doing plenty of drinking. This is regarded as a very bad sign indeed, because while everybody goes to the chicken club now and then to give Tony Bertazzola, the owner, a friendly play, very few people care to do any drinking there, because Tony's liquor is not meant for anybody to drink except the customers. Well, Miss Billy Perry gets Waldo Winchester on his pegs again and wipes his chin off with her handkerchief, and by he is all okay except for a big lump on his chin. And all the time she is telling Waldo Winchester what a big bum Dave the Dude is, although afterwards Miss Missouri Martin gets hold of Miss Billy Perry and puts the blast on her plenty for chasing a two-handed spender such as Dave the Dude out of the joint. "You are nothing but a little sap," Miss Missouri Martin tells Miss Billy Perry. "You cannot get the right time off this newspaper guy, while everybody knows Dave the Dude is a very fast man with $1. "But I love Mr. Winchester," says Miss Billy Perry. "He is so romantic. He is not a bootlegger and a gunman like Dave the Dude. He puts lovely pieces in the paper about me, and he is a gentleman at all times." Now, of course, Miss Missouri Martin is not in a position to argue about gentlemen, because she meets very few in the 1600 Club. And anyway, she does not wish to make Waldo Winchester mad, as he is apt to turn around and put pieces in his paper that will be a knock to the joint. So she lets the matter drop. Miss Billy Perry and Waldo Winchester go on holding hands between her numbers, and maybe kissing each other now and then, as young people are liable to do. And Dave the Dude plays the chill for the 1600 Club, and everything seems to be all right. Naturally, we are all very glad there is no more trouble over the proposition, because the best Dave can get is the worst of it in a jam with a newspaper guy. Personally, I figure Dave will soon find himself another doll and forget all about Miss Billy Perry, because now that I take another peek at her, I can see where she is just about the same as any other tap dancer, except that she is red-headed. Tap dancers are generally blackheads, but I do not know why. Moosh, the doorman at the 1600 Club, tells me Miss Missouri Martin keeps plugging for Dave the Dude with Miss Billy Perry in a quiet way, because he says he hears Miss Missouri Martin make the following crack one night to her. "Well, I do not see any Simple Simon on your lean and linger." This is Miss Missouri Martin's way of saying she sees no diamond on Miss Billy Perry's finger, for Miss Missouri Martin is an old experienced doll who figures if a guy loves a doll, he will prove it with diamonds. Miss Missouri Martin has many diamonds herself, though how any guy can ever get himself heated up enough about Miss Missouri Martin to give her diamonds is more than I can see. I am not a guy who goes around much, so I do not see Dave the Dude for a couple of weeks. But late one Sunday afternoon, little Johnny McGowan, who is one of Dave's men, comes and says to me like this: "What do you think? Dave grabs the scribe a little while ago and is taking him out for an airing." Well, Johnny is so excited it is some time before I can get him cooled out enough to explain. It seems that Dave the Dude gets his biggest car out of the garage and sends his driver, Wop Joe, over to the item office where Waldo Winchester works, with a message that Miss Billy Perry wishes to see Waldo right away at Miss Missouri Martin's apartment on 59th Street. Of course, this message is nothing but the phonus balonus, but Waldo drops in for it and gets in the car. Then Wop Joe drives him up to Miss Missouri Martin's apartment. And who gets in the car there but Dave the Dude, and away they go. Now, this is very bad news indeed, because when Dave the Dude takes a guy out for an airing, the guy very often does not come back. What happens to him, I never ask, because the best a guy can get by asking questions in this man's town is a bust in the nose. But I am much worried over this proposition, because I like Dave the Dude, and I know that taking a newspaper guy like Waldo Winchester out for an airing is apt to cause talk, especially if he does not come back. The other guys that Dave the Dude takes out for airings do not mean much in particular. But here is a guy who may produce trouble, even if he is a sucker, on account of being connected up with a newspaper. I know enough about newspapers to know that by and by the editor or somebody will be around wishing to know where Waldo Winchester's pieces about Broadway are. And if there are no pieces from Waldo Winchester, the editor will wish to know why. Finally, it will get around to where other people will wish to know. And after a while, many people will be running around saying, "Where is Waldo Winchester?" And if enough people in this town get to running around saying, "Where is so-and-so?" it becomes a great mystery. And the newspapers hop on the cops, and the cops hop on everybody, and by there is so much heat in town that it is no place for a guy to be. But what is to be done about this situation? I do not know. Personally, it strikes me as very bad indeed, and while Johnny goes away to do a little telephoning, I am trying to think up some place to go where people will see me and remember afterwards that I am there, in case it is necessary for them to remember. Finally, Johnny comes back, very excited, and says,
"Hey, that dude is up at the Woodcock Inn on the Pelham Parkway, and he is sending out the word from one and all to come at once. Good time Charlie Bernstein just gets the wire and tells me. Something is doing. The rest of the mob are on their way, so let us be moving."
But here is an invitation which does not strike me as a good thing at all. The way I look at it, Dave the Dude is no company for a guy like me at this time. The chances are he either does something to Waldo Winchester already, or is getting ready to do something to him which I wish no part of. Personally, I have nothing against newspaper guys, not even the ones who write pieces about Broadway. If Dave the Dude wishes to do something to Waldo Winchester, all right. But what is the sense of bringing outsiders into it? But the next thing I know, I am in Johnny McGowan's roadster, and he is zipping along very fast indeed, paying practically no attention to traffic lights or anything else. As we go busting out of the concourse, I get to thinking the situation over. And I figure that Dave the Dude probably keeps thinking about Miss Billy Perry and drinking liquor such as they sell in the Chicken Club until finally he blows his topper. The way I look at it, only a guy who is off his nut will think of taking a newspaper guy out for an airing over a doll when dolls are a dime a dozen in this man's town. Still, I remember reading in the papers about a lot of different guys who are considered very sensible until they get tangled up with a doll, and maybe loving her. And the first thing anybody knows, they hop out of windows, or shoot themselves, or somebody else. And I can see where even a guy like Dave the Dude may go daffy over a doll. I can see that little Johnny McGowan is worried too, but he does not say much. And we pull up in front of the Woodcock Inn in no time whatever, to find a lot of other cars there ahead of us, some of which I recognize as belonging to different parties. The Woodcock Inn is what is called a roadhouse, and is run by Big Nig Skolsky, a very nice man indeed, and a friend of everybody's. It stands back a piece off the Pelham Parkway, and is a very pleasant place to go to, what with Nig having a good band, and a floor show with a lot of fair-looking dolls, and everything else a man can wish for a good time. It gets a nice play from nice people, although Nig's liquor is nothing extra. Personally, I never go there much, because I do not care for roadhouses. But it is a great spot for Dave the Dude when he is pitching parties, or even when he is only drinking single-handed. There is a lot of racket in the joint as we drive up, and who comes out to meet us but Dave the Dude himself, with a big hello. His face is very red, and he seems heated up no little. But he does not look like a guy who is meaning any harm to anybody, especially a newspaper guy. "Come on in, guys," Dave the Dude yells. "Come right in." So we go in, and the place is full of people sitting at tables or out on the floor dancing, and I see Miss Missouri Martin with all her diamonds hanging from her in different places, and good time Charlie Bernstein, and Feet Samuels, and Tony Bertazzola, and Skeets Bolivar, and Nick the Greek, and Rochester Red, and a lot of other guys and dolls from around and about. In fact, it looks as if everybody from all the joints on Broadway are present, including Miss Billy Perry, who is all dressed up in white and is lugging a big bundle of orchids and so forth, and who is giggling and smiling and shaking hands and going on generally. And finally, I see Waldo Winchester, the scribe, sitting at a ringside table all by himself. But there is nothing wrong with him as far as I can see. I mean, he seems to be all in one piece so far. "Dave," I say to Dave the Dude, very quiet, "what is coming off here? You know a guy cannot be too careful what he does around this town, and I will hate to see you tangled up in anything right now." "Why," Dave says, "what are you talking about? Nothing is coming off here but a wedding, and it is going to be the best wedding anybody on Broadway ever sees. We are waiting for the preacher now." "You mean somebody is going to be married?" I ask, being now somewhat confused. "Certainly," Dave the Dude says. "What do you think? What is the idea of a wedding anyway?" "Who is going to be married?" I ask. "Nobody but Billy and the scribe," Dave says. "This is the greatest thing I ever do in my life. I run into Billy the other night, and she is crying her eyes out because she loves this scribe and wishes to marry him. But it seems the scribe has nothing he can use for money. So I tell Billy to leave it to me, because you know I love her myself so much. I wish to see her happy at all times, even if she has to marry to be that way. So I frame this wedding party, and after they are married, I am going to stake them to a few G's so they can get a good running start," Dave says. "But I do not tell the scribe, and I do not let Billy tell him, as I wish it to be a big surprise to him. I kidnap him this afternoon and bring him out here, and he is scared half to death thinking I am going to scrag him. In fact," Dave says, "I never see a guy so scared. He is still so scared nothing seems to cheer him up. Go over and tell him to shake himself together, because nothing but happiness for him is coming off here." Well, I wish to say I am greatly relieved to think that Dave intends doing nothing worse to Waldo Winchester than getting him married up. So I go over to where Waldo is sitting. He certainly looks somewhat alarmed. He is all in a huddle with himself, and he has what you call a vacant stare in his eyes. I can see that he is indeed frightened, so I give him a jolly slap on the back and I say, "Congratulations, pal. Cheer up. The worst is yet to come." "You bet it is," Waldo Winchester says, his voice so solemn I am greatly surprised. "You are a fine-looking bridegroom," I say. "You look as if you were at a funeral instead of a wedding. Why do you not laugh ha-ha and maybe take a dram or two and go to cutting up some?" "Mister," says Waldo Winchester, "my wife is not going to care for me getting married to Miss Billy Perry." "Your wife?" I say, much astonished. "What is this you are speaking of? How can you have any wife except Miss Billy Perry? This is great foolishness." "I know," Waldo says, very sad. "I know. But I got a wife just the same, and she is going to be very nervous when she hears about this. My wife is very strict with me. My wife does not allow me to go around marrying people. My wife is Lola Sapola, of the Rolling Sapolas, the acrobats, and I am married to her for 5 years. She is the strong lady who juggles the other 4 people in the act. My wife just gets back from a year's tour of the interstate time, and she is at the Marks Hotel right this minute. I am beset by this proposition." "Does Miss Billy Perry know about this wife?" I ask. "No," he says. "No. She thinks I am single." "But why do you not tell Dave the Dude you are already married? when he brings you out here to marry you off to Miss Billy Perry, I ask. It seems to me a newspaper guy must know it is against the law for a guy to marry several different dolls, unless he is a Turk or some such. Well, Waldo says, if I tell Dave the Dude I am married, after taking his doll away from him, I am quite sure Dave will be very much excited and maybe do something harmful to my health. Now, there is much in what the guy says, to be sure. I am inclined to think myself that Dave will be somewhat disturbed when he learns of this situation, especially when Miss Billy Perry starts in being unhappy about it. But what is to be done, I do not know, except maybe to let the wedding go on, and then when Waldo is out of reach of Dave, to put in a claim that he is insane and that the marriage does not count. It is a sure thing I do not wish to be around when Dave the Dude hears Waldo is already married. I am thinking that maybe I better take it on the lam out of there, when there is a great row at the door, and I hear Dave the Dude yelling that the preacher arrives. He is a very nice-looking preacher at that, though he seems somewhat surprised by the goings-on, especially when Miss Missouri Martin steps up and takes charge of him. Miss Missouri Martin tells him she is fond of preachers, and is quite used to them, because she is twice married by preachers, and twice by justices of the peace, and once by a ship's captain at sea. By this time, one and all present, except maybe myself and Waldo Winchester, and a preacher, and maybe Miss Billy Perry, are somewhat cornered. Waldo is still sitting at his table looking very sad and saying, yes, and no, to Miss Billy Perry whenever she skips past him, for Miss Billy Perry is too much pleasured up with happiness to stay long in one spot. Dave the Dude is more corned than anybody else, because he has 2 or 3 days running start on everybody. And when Dave the Dude is corned, I wish to say that he is a very unreliable guy as to temper, and he is apt to explode right in your face any minute. But he seems to be getting a great bang out of the doings. Well, by and by, Nig Skolsky has the dance floor cleared, and then he moves out on the floor a sort of arch of very beautiful flowers. The idea seems to be that Miss Billy Perry and Waldo Winchester are to be married under this arch. I can see that Dave the Dude must put in several days planning this whole proposition, and it must cost him plenty of the old do-re-mi, especially as I see him showing Miss Missouri Martin a diamond ring as big as a cough drop. It is for the bride, Dave the Dude says. The poor Lugan she is marrying will never have enough dough to buy her such a rock, and she always wishes a big one. I get it off a guy who brings it in from Los Angeles. I am going to give the bride away myself in person. So, how do I act, Mizzou? I want Billy to have everything according to the book. Well, while Miss Missouri Martin is trying to remember back to one of her weddings to tell him, I take another peek at Waldo Winchester to see how he is making out. I once see 2 guys go to the old warm squatavoo up in Sing Sing, and I wish to say both are laughing heartily compared to Waldo Winchester at this moment. Miss Billy Perry is sitting with him, and the orchestra leader is calling his men dirty names because none of them can think of how "Oh, Promise Me" goes when Dave the Dude yells, well, we are all set. Let the happy couple step forward. Miss Billy Perry bounces up and grabs Waldo Winchester by the arm and pulls him up out of his chair. After a peek at his face, I am willing to lay 6 to 5 he does not make the arch. But he finally gets there, with everybody laughing and clapping their hands, and the preacher comes forward, and Dave the Dude looks happier than I ever see him look before in his life, as they all get together under the arch of flowers. Well, all of a sudden there is a terrible racket at the front door of the Woodcock Inn, with some doll doing a lot of hollering in a deep voice that sounds like a man's, and naturally everybody turns and looks that way. The doorman, a guy by the name of Slugsy Sacks, who is a very hard man indeed, seems to be trying to keep somebody out, But pretty soon there is a heavy bump, and Slugsy Sax falls down, and in comes a doll about 4 feet high and 5 feet wide. In fact, I never see such a wide doll. She looks all hammered down. Her face is almost as wide as her shoulders and makes me think of a great big full moon. She comes in bounding like, and I can see that she is all churned up about something. As she bounces in, I hear a gurgle, and I look around to see Waldo Winchester slumping down to the floor, almost dragging Miss Billy Perry with him. Well, the wide doll walks right up to the bunch under the arch and says in a large bass voice, "Which one is Dave the Dude?" "I am Dave the Dude," says Dave the Dude, stepping up. "What do you mean busting in here like a walrus and gumming up our wedding?" "So, you are the guy who kidnaps my ever-loving husband to marry him off to this little red-headed pancake here, are you?" the white doll says, looking at Dave the Dude but pointing at Miss Billy Perry. Well now, calling Miss Billy Perry a pancake to Dave the Dude is a very serious proposition, and Dave the Dude gets very angry. He is usually rather polite to dolls, but you can see he does not care for the white doll's manner whatever. "Say, listen here," Dave the Dude says. "You better take a walk before somebody clips you. You must be drunk," he says, "or daffy," he says. "What are you talking about anyway?" "You will see what I am talking about," the white doll yells. "The guy on the floor there is my lawful husband. You probably frightened him to death, the poor dear. You kidnap him to marry this red-headed thing, and I am going to get you arrested as sure as my name is Lola Sapola, you simple-looking tramp." Naturally, everybody is greatly horrified at a doll using such language to Dave the Dude, because Dave is known to shoot guys for much less. But instead of doing something to the wide doll at once, Dave says, "What is this talk I hear? Who is married to who? Get out of here," Dave says, grabbing the wide doll's arm. Well, she makes out as if she is going to slap Dave in the face with her left hand, and Dave naturally pulls his kisser out of the way. But instead of doing anything with her left, Lola Sapola suddenly drives her right fist smack dab into Dave the Dude's stomach, which naturally comes forward as his face goes back. I wish to say I see many a body punch delivered in my life, but I never see a prettier one than this. What is more, Lola Sapola steps in with the punch, so there is plenty on it. Now, a guy who eats and drinks like Dave the Dude does cannot take them so good in the stomach, so Dave goes, "Hoof!" and sits down very hard on the dance floor, and as he is sitting there, he is fumbling in his pants pocket for the old equalizer, so everybody around tears for cover, except Lola Sapola and Miss Billy Perry and Waldo Winchester. But before he can get his pistol out, Lola Sapola reaches down and grabs Dave by the collar and hoists him to his feet. She lets go her hold on him, leaving Dave standing on his pins, but teetering around somewhat, and then she drives her right hand to Dave's stomach a second time. The punch drops Dave again, and Lola steps up to him as if she is going to give him the foot. But she only gathers up Waldo Winchester from off the floor and slings him across her shoulder like he is a sack of oats, and starts for the door. Dave the Dude sits up on the floor again, and by this time he has the old equalizer in his duke. "Only for me being a gentleman I will fill you full of slugs," he yells. Lola Sapola never even looks back, because by this time she is petting Waldo Winchester's head and calling him loving names, and saying what a shame it is for bad characters like Dave the Dude to be abusing her precious one. It all sounds to me as if Lola Sapola thinks well of Waldo Winchester. Well, after she gets out of sight, Dave the Dude gets up off the floor and stands there looking at Miss Billy Perry, who was out to break all crying records. The rest of us come out from under cover, including the preacher, and we are wondering how mad Dave the Dude is going to be about the wedding being ruined. But Dave the Dude seems only disappointed and sad. "Billy," he says to Miss Billy Perry, "I am mighty sorry you do not get your wedding. All I wish for is your happiness. But I do not believe you can ever be happy with his scribe, if he also has to have his lion tamer around. As Cupid, I am a total bust. This is the only nice thing I ever try to do in my whole life, and it is too bad it does not come off. Maybe if you wait until we can drown her or something." "Dave," says Miss Billy Perry, dropping so many tears that she seems to finally wash herself right into Dave the Dude's arms, "I will never be happy with such a guy as Waldo Winchester. I can see now you are the only man for me." Well, Dave the Dude says, cheering right up. "Where is the preacher? Bring on the preacher, and let us have our wedding anyway. I see Mr. and Mrs. Dave the Dude the other day, and they seem very happy. But you can never tell about married people. So of course I am never going to let on to Dave the Dude that I am the one who telephones Lola Sapola at the Marks Hotel, because maybe I do not do Dave any too much of a favor at that." End of Romance in the Roaring Forties by Damon Runyon. Read by Rick Rodstrom.
Shadow, a Parable by Edgar Allan Poe. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. Read by Sheikbear1602. Shadow, a Parable. Yeah, though I walk through the valley of the shadow. Psalm of David. Ye who read are still among the living, but I, who write, shall have long since gone my way into the region of shadows. For indeed, strange things shall happen, and secret things be known, and many centuries shall pass away, ere these memorials to be seen of men. And, when seen, there will be some to disbelieve, and some to doubt, and yet a few who will find much to ponder upon in the characters here, graven with a stylus of iron. The year had been a year of terror, and of feelings more intense than terror, for which there is no name upon the earth. For many prodigies and signs had taken place, and far and wide, over sea and land, the black wings of the pestilence were spread abroad. To those, nevertheless, cunning in the stars, it was not unknown that the heavens wore an aspect of ill. And to me, the Greek oinos, among others, it was evident that now had arrived the alteration of that 794th year, when, at the entrance of the Aries, the planet Jupiter is conjoined with the red ring of the terrible Saturnus. The peculiar spirit of the skies, if I mistake not greatly, will manifest itself, not only in the physical orb of the earth, but in the souls, imaginations, and meditations of mankind. Over some flasks of the red-sheen wine, within the walls of a noble hall, in a dim city called Ptolemais, we sat, at night, a company of 7, and to our chamber there was no entrance save by a lofty door of brass, and the door was fashioned by the artisan Coronos, and being of rare workmanship, was fastened from within. Black draperies, likewise, in the gloomy room, shut out from our view the moon, the lurid stars, and the people-less streets, but the boding and the memory of evil, they would not be so excluded. There were things around us, and about of which I can render no distinct account, things material and spiritual, heaviness in the atmosphere, a sense of suffocation, anxiety, and above all, that terrible state of existence which the nervous experience when the senses are keenly living and awake, and meanwhile the powers of thought lie dormant. A dead weight hung upon us. It hung upon our limbs, upon the household furniture, upon the goblets from which we drank, and all things were depressed, and bore down thereby, all things save only the flames of the 7 lamps, which illuminated our revel. Uprearing themselves in tall, slender lines of light, they thus remained burning all pallid and motionless, and in the mirror which their lustre formed upon the round table of ebony at which we sat, each of us there assembled beheld the pallor of his own countenance, and the unquiet glare in the downcast eyes of his companions. Yet we laughed, and were merry in our proper way, which was hysterical, and sang the songs of Anacreon, which are madness, and drank deeply, although the purple wine reminded us of blood. For there was yet another tenant of our chamber, in the person of young Zoilus, dead, and at full length he lay, enshrouded, the genius and the demon of the scene. Alas! he bore no portion in our mirth, save that his countenance, distorted with the plague, and his eyes, in which death had but half extinguished the fire of the pestilence, seemed to take such interest in our merriment as the dead may haply take in the merriment of those who are to die. But although I, Oinos, felt that the eyes of the departed were upon me, still I forced myself not to perceive the bitterness of their expression, and gazing down steadily into the depths of the ebony mirror, sang with a loud and sonorous voice the songs of the son of Theos. But gradually my songs they ceased, and their echoes, rolling afar among the sable draperies of the chamber, became weak and undistinguishable, and so faded away, and lo! from among those sable draperies, where the sounds of the song departed, there came forth a dark and undefined shadow, a shadow such as the moon, when low in heaven, might fashion from the figure of a man, but it was the shadow neither of man, nor of God, nor of any familiar thing. And quivering a while among the draperies of the room, it at length rested in full view upon the surface of the door of brass. But the shadow was vague, and formless, and indefinite, and was a shadow neither of man nor of God, neither god of Greece, nor god of Chaldea, nor any Egyptian god. And the shadow rested upon the brazen doorway, and under the arc of the entablature of the door, and moved not, nor spoke any word, but there became stationary and remained. And the door whereupon the shadow rested was, if I remember right, over against the feet of the young Zoilus enshrouded. But we, the 7 there assembled, having seen the shadow as it came out from among the draperies, dared not steadily behold it, but cast down our eyes, and gazed continually into the depths in the mirror of ebony. And at length I, Oinos, speaking some low words, demanded of the shadow its dwelling and appellation. And the shadow answered, I am Shadow, and my dwelling is near to the catacombs of Ptolemais, and hard by those dim plains of Helusion which border upon the foul Charonian canal. And then did we, the 7, start from our seats in horror, and stand trembling and shuddering and aghast, for the tones in the voice of the shadow were not the tones of any being, but a multitude of beings, and varying in their cadences from syllable to syllable, fell duskly upon our ears in the well-remembered and familiar accents of many thousand departed friends. End of Shadow, a Parable.
The Smear by John Beams. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Smear by John Beams. In the Malamute Saloon in Dawson, the lights blazed. There was noisy music, whiskey, and gambling, all the sourdough's dearest joys. Outside it was dark, with the first breath of the Yukon winter in the north wind. Finn Charlie lugged out a heavy poke and poured a couple of ounces of gold dust into the pan of the scales on the bar. He had become suddenly prosperous, and he intended to celebrate. 2 members of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police entered. The constable took his post at the door, but the corporal walked forward until he stood under the first of the hanging lights, and his keen eyes searched the company, missing no man. Finn Charlie flinched, the broad nostrils of his flat nose twitched, and his lashless yellow eyes flickered uneasily. Then he gulped down a glass of raw whiskey, coughed, and straightened. He knew the man was dead. Nobody had seen him. He was safe if he did not betray himself. When all eyes were upon him, the corporal spoke in a clear voice. "Boys, a man was robbed and murdered on the Klondike Trail tonight, a mile out of town." Again Finn Charlie felt a wild impulse to escape. But the eyes of the corporal held the room. He must do as the others did. With an unmeaning grin upon his face, Finn Charlie swaggered up to join the half-circle collecting around the policeman. The light illumined all their faces, while the corporal, under the lamp, was in shadow. His steady glance rested upon each in turn. The grin remained upon Finn Charlie's face, but under it his jaws were tight. "The man was not quite dead when we found him," said the corporal slowly, and paused. Finn Charlie's broken fingernails were pressing into the palms of his hands, but he did not feel them. He was wishing the man would go on talking. "He said a few words before he died," said the corporal, and paused again. In the tense half-circle nobody breathed. Finn Charlie felt himself choking. Sweat started out on his forehead. The cold, penetrating glance of the corporal passed from face to face and back again. "He had been shot from behind," he went on, "but the man who fired the shot turned him over on his face to frisk him. He pretended he was dead, but he saw—" Finn Charlie shot a lightning glance over his shoulder. There were men on each side of him. Immediately in the rear 2 men had climbed on chairs for a better view. He must stand still or arouse suspicion. "The light was not very good, but he saw one thing clear," went on the slow, steady voice, each word like a hammer blow. "He said to me, and they were the last words he spoke." The restless eyes flickered upon Finn Charlie's face, passed on, and returned. "He said to me, 'Find the man with a big black smear on his left cheek.'" All unconsciously, Finn Charlie's hand shot up to his cheek. "In the King's name!" cried the corporal, and leaped upon him. The constable at the door flung forward. The handcuffs clicked. Fighting like a maniac and yelling hoarsely, Finn Charlie was dragged away. At the mounted police post, they found upon him the old silver monogrammed watch of the dead man. "But," said the constable later, "I don't understand yet how you did it. When we reached the poor devil he was stone dead. He never said a word. How did you know the murderer had a smear on his face?" "I didn't," said the corporal. "And, besides, the murderer had no smear on his face." End of The Smear by John Beams. Read by Roger Melin.
The Deacon's Trout by Henry Ward Beecher. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Deacon's Trout. He was a curious trout. I believe he knew Sunday just as well as Deacon Marble did. At any rate, The Deacon thought the Trout meant to aggravate him. The Deacon, you know, is a little waggish. He often tells about that Trout. Says he, "One Sunday morning, just as I got along by the willows, I heard an awful splash, and not 10 feet from shore I saw the Trout as long as my arm, just curving over like a bow and going down with something for breakfast. Gracious, says I, and I almost jumped out of the wagon. But my wife Polly, says she, 'What on earth are you thinking of, Deacon? It's Sabbath day, and you're going to meeting. It's a pretty business for a deacon.' That sort of cooled me off. But I do say that for about a minute I wished I wasn't a deacon. But 'twouldn't make any difference, for I came down next day to mill on purpose, and I came down once or twice more, and nothing was to be seen, though I tried him with the most tempting things. Well, next Sunday I came along again, and to save my life I couldn't keep off worldly and wandering thoughts. I tried to be saying my catechism, but I couldn't keep my eyes off the pond as we came up to the willows. I got along in the catechism as smooth as the road to the 4th commandment, and I was saying it out loud for Polly, and just as I was saying, 'What is required in the 4th commandment?' I heard a splash, and there was that Trout, and afore I could think, I said, 'Gracious, Polly, I must have that Trout.' She almost riz right up. 'I knew you wasn't saying your catechism, Hearty. Is this the way you answer the question about keeping the Lord's Day?' 'I'm ashamed, Deacon Marble,' says she. 'You'd better change your road and go to meeting on the road over the hill. If I was a deacon, I wouldn't let a fish's tail whisk the whole catechism out of my head, and I had to go to the meeting on the hill road all the rest of the summer.'" End of The Deacon's Trout, read by Anthony St. Pierre. Toronto, March 2025.
The King's Messenger by F. Marion Crawford. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Barry Eads. The King's Messenger. It was a rather dim daylight dinner. I remember that quite distinctly, for I could see the glow of the sunset over the trees in the park, through the high window at the west end of the dining room. I had expected to find a larger party, I believe, for I recollect being a little surprised at seeing only a dozen people assembled at table. It seemed to me that in old times, ever so long ago, when I had last stayed in that house, there had been as many as 30 or 40 guests. I recognized some of them among a number of beautiful portraits that hung on the walls. There was room for a great many, because there was only one huge window at one end and one large door at the other. I was very much surprised, too, to see a portrait of myself, evidently painted about 20 years ago by Lenbach. It seemed very strange that I should have so completely forgotten the picture, and that I should not be able to remember having sat for it. We were good friends, it is true, and he might have painted it from memory, without my knowledge, but it was certainly strange that he should never have told me about it. The portraits that hung in the dining room were all very good indeed, and all, I should say, by the best painters of that time. My left-hand neighbor was a lovely young girl whose name I had forgotten, though I had known her long, and I fancied that she looked a little disappointed when she saw that I was beside her. On my right there was a vacant seat, and beyond it sat an elderly woman with features as hard as the overwhelmingly splendid diamonds she wore. Her eyes made me think of gray glass marbles cemented into a stone mask. It was odd that her name should have escaped me too, for I had often met her. The table looked irregular, and I counted the guests mechanically while I ate my soup. We were only 12, but the empty chair beside me was the 13th place. I suppose it was not very tactful of me to mention this, but I wanted to say something to the beautiful girl on my left, and no other subject for a general remark suggested itself. Just as I was going to speak, I remembered who she was. "Miss Lorna," I said, to attract her attention, for she was looking away from me toward the door. I hope you are not superstitious about there being 13 at table, are you? We are only 12, she said, in the sweetest voice in the world. Yes, but someone else is coming. There's an empty chair here beside me. Oh, he doesn't count, said Miss Lorna quietly. At least, not for everybody. When did you get here? Just in time for dinner, I suppose. Yes, I answered. I'm in luck to be beside you. It seems an age since we were last here together. It does indeed. Miss Lorna sighed and looked at the pictures on the opposite wall. I've lived a lifetime since I saw you last. I smiled at the exaggeration. When you are 30, you won't talk of having your life behind you, I said. I shall never be 30, Miss Lorna answered, with such an odd little air of conviction that I did not think of anything to say. Besides, life isn't made up of years or months or hours or of anything that has to do with time, she continued. You ought to know that. Our bodies are something better than mere clocks, wound up to show just how old we are at every moment, by our hair turning gray or our teeth falling out and our faces getting wrinkled and yellow, or puffy and red. Look at your own portrait over there. I don't mind saying that you must have been 20 years younger when that was painted, but I'm sure you are just the same man today, improved by age perhaps. I heard a sweet little echoing laugh that seemed very far away, and indeed I could not have sworn that it rippled from Miss Lorna's beautiful lips, for though they were parted and smiling, my impression is that they did not move, even as little as most women's lips are moved by laughter. Thank you for thinking me improved, I said. I find you a little changed, too. I was just going to say that you seemed sadder, but you laughed just then. Did I? I suppose that's the right thing to do when the play is over, isn't it? If it has been an amusing play, I answered, humoring her. The wonderful violet eyes turned to me, full of light. It's not been a bad play. I don't complain. Why do you speak of it as over? I'll tell you, because I'm sure you will keep my secret. You will, won't you? We were always such good friends, you and I, even 2 years ago when I was young and silly. Will you promise not to tell anyone till I'm gone? Gone? Yes, will you promise? Of course I will, but I did not finish the sentence, because Miss Lorna bent nearer to me, so as to speak in a much lower tone. While I listened, I felt her sweet young breath on my cheek. I'm going away tonight with the man who is to sit at your other side, she said. He's a little late. He often is, for he is tremendously busy. But he'll come presently, and after dinner we shall just stroll out into the garden and never come back. That's my secret. You won't betray me, will you? Again, as she looked at me, I heard that far-off silver laugh, sweet and low. I was almost too much surprised by what she had told me to notice how still her parted lips were, but that comes back to me now, with many other details. My dear Miss Lorna, I said, do think of your parents before taking such a step. I have thought of them, she answered. Of course they would never consent, and I am very sorry to leave them, but it can't be helped. At this moment, as often happens when two people are talking in low tones at a large dinner table, there was a momentary lull in the general conversation, and I was spared the trouble of making any further answer to what Miss Lorna had told me so unexpectedly, and with such profound confidence in my discretion. To tell the truth, she would very probably not have listened, whether my words expressed sympathy or protest, for she had turned suddenly pale, and her eyes were wide and dark. The lull in the talk at table was due to the appearance of the man who was to occupy the vacant place beside me. He had entered the room very quietly, and he made no elaborate apology for being late, as he sat down, bending his head courteously to our hostess and her husband, and smiling in a gentle sort of way as he nodded to the others. Please forgive me, he said quietly. I was detained by a funeral and missed the train. It was not until he had taken his place that he looked across me at Miss Lorna and exchanged a glance of recognition with her. I noticed that the lady with the hard face and the splendid diamonds, who was at his other side, drew away from him a little, as if not wishing even to let his sleeve brush against her bare arm. It occurred to me at the same time that Miss Lorna must be wishing me anywhere else than between her and the man with whom she was just about to run away, and I wished for their sake and mine that I could change places with him. He was certainly not like other men, and though few people would have called him handsome, there was something about him that instantly fixed the attention. Rarely beautiful though Miss Lorna was, almost everyone would have noticed him first on entering the room, and most people, I think, would have been more interested by his face than by hers. I could well imagine that some women might love him, even to distraction, though it was just as easy to understand that others might be strongly repelled by him, and might even fear him. For my part, I shall not try to describe him as one describes an ordinary man, with a dozen or so adjectives that leave nothing to the imagination, but yet offer it no picture that it can grasp. My instinct was to fear him, rather than think of him as a possible friend, but I could not help feeling instant admiration for him, as one does at first sight for anything that is very complete, harmonious, and strong. He was dark, and pale with a shadowy pallor I never saw in any other face. The features of thrice great Hermes were not molded in more perfect symmetry. His luminous eyes were not unkind, but there was something fateful in them, and they were set very deep under the grand white brow. His age I could not guess, but I should have called him young. Standing, I had seen that he was tall and sinewy, and now that he was seated, he had the unmistakable look of a man accustomed to be in authority, to be heard and to be obeyed. His hands were white, his fingers straight, lean, and very strong. Everyone at the table seemed to know him, but as often happens among civilized people, no one called him by name in speaking to him. "We were beginning to be afraid that you might not get here," said our host. "Really?" The 13th guest smiled quietly, but shook his head. "Did you ever know me to break an engagement under any circumstances?" The master of the house laughed, though not very cordially, I thought. "No," he answered, "your reputation for keeping your appointments is proverbial. Even your enemies must admit that." The guest nodded and smiled again. Miss Lorna bent toward me. "What do you think of him?" she asked, almost in a whisper. "Very striking sort of man," I answered in a low tone, "but I'm inclined to be a little afraid of him." "So was I at first," she said, and I heard the silver laugh again. "But that soon wears off," she went on. "You'll know him better some day." "Shall I?" "Yes, I'm quite sure you will. Oh, I don't pretend that I fell in love with him at first sight. I went through a phase of feeling afraid of him, as almost everyone does. You see, when people first meet him, they cannot possibly know how kind and gentle he can be, though he is so tremendously strong. I've heard him called cruel and ruthless and cold, but it's not true. Indeed, it's not. He can be as gentle as a woman, and he's the truest friend in all the world." I was going to ask her to tell me his name, but just then I saw that she was looking at him across me, and I sat as far back in my chair as I could, so that they might speak to each other if they wished to. Their eyes met, and there was a longing light in both. I could not help glancing from one to the other, and Miss Lorna's sweet lips moved almost imperceptibly, though no sound came from them. I have seen young lovers make that small sign to each other even across a room, the signal of a kiss given and returned in the heart's thoughts. If she had been less beautiful and young, if the man she loved had not been so magnificently manly, it would have irritated me. But it seemed natural that they should love and not be ashamed of it, and I only hoped that no one else at the table had noticed the tenderly quivering little contraction of the young girl's exquisite mouth. "You remembered," said the man quietly. "I got your message this morning. Thank you." "I hope it's not going to be very hard," murmured Miss Lorna, smiling. "Not that it would make any great difference if it were," she added more thoughtfully. "It's the easiest thing in life," he said, "and I promise that you shall never regret it." "I trust you," the young girl answered simply. Then she turned away, for she no doubt felt the awkwardness of talking to him across me of a secret which she had confided to me without letting him know that she had done so. Instinctively, I turned to him, feeling that the moment had come for disregarding formality and making his acquaintance, since we were neighbors at table in a friend's house and I had known Miss Lorna so long. Besides, it is always interesting to talk with a man who is just going to do something very dangerous or dramatic and who does not guess that you know what he is about. I suppose you motored here from town as you said you missed the train, I said. It's a good road, isn't it? Yes, I literally flew, replied the dark man with his gentle smile. I hope you're not superstitious about 13 at table. Not in the least, I answered. In the first place, I'm a fatalist about everything that doesn't depend on my own free will. As I have not the slightest intention of doing anything to shorten my life, it will certainly not come to an abrupt end by any autosuggestion arising from a silly superstition like that about 13. Autosuggestion? That's rather a new light on the old belief. And secondly, I continued, I don't believe in death. There is no such thing. Really? My neighbor seemed greatly surprised. How do you mean? He asked. I don't think I understand you. I'm sure I don't, put in Miss Lorna, and the silver laugh followed. She had overheard the conversation, and some of the others were listening too. You don't kill a book by translating it, I said, rather glad to expound my views. Death is only a translation of life into another language. That's what I mean. That's a most interesting point of view, observed the 13th guest thoughtfully. I never thought of the matter in that way before, though I've often seen the expression translated in epitaphs. Are you sure you are not indulging in a little paronomasa? What's that? Inquired the hard-faced lady, with all the contempt which a scholarly word deserves in polite society. It means punning, I answered. No, I am not making a pun. Grave subjects do not lend themselves to low forms of humor. I assure you, I am quite in earnest. Death, in the ordinary sense, is not a real phenomenon at all, so long as there is any life in the universe. It's a name we apply to a change we only partly understand. Learned discussions are an awful bore, said the hard-faced lady very audibly. I don't advise you to argue the question too sharply with your neighbor there, laughed the master of the house, leaning forward and speaking to me. He'll get the better of you. He's an expert at what you call translating people into another language. If the man beside me was a famous surgeon, as our host perhaps meant, it seemed to me that the remark was not in very good taste. He looked more like a soldier. Does our friend mean that you are in the army, and that you are a dangerous person? I asked of him. No, he answered quietly. I am only a king's messenger, and, in my own opinion, I'm not at all dangerous. It must be rather an active life, I said, in order to say something. Constantly coming and going, I suppose. Yes, constantly. I felt that Miss Lorna was watching and listening, and I turned to her, only to find that she was again looking beyond me at my neighbor, though he did not see her. I remember her face very distinctly as it was just then. The recollection is, in fact, the last impression I retain of her matchless beauty, for I never saw her after that evening. It is something to have seen one of the most beautiful women in the world gazing at the man who was more to her than life and all it held. It is something I cannot forget. But he did not return her look just then, for he had joined in the general conversation, and very soon afterward he practically absorbed it. He talked well, more than well, marvelously. For before long even the lady with the hard face was listening spellbound, with the rest of us, to his stories of nations and tales of men, brilliant descriptions, anecdotes of heroism and tenderness that were each a perfect coin from the mint of humanity, with dashes of daring wit, glimpses of a profound insight into the great mystery of the beyond, and now and then a manly comment on life that came straight from the heart. Never in all my long experience have I heard poet or scholar or soldier or ruler of men talk as he did that evening, and as I listened I was more and more amazed that such a man should be but a simple king's messenger, as he said he was, earning a poor gentleman's living by carrying his Majesty's dispatches from London to the ends of the earth, and I made some sad and sober inward reflections on the vast difference between the gift of talking supremely well and the genius a man must have to accomplish even one little thing that may endure in history, in literature, or in art. "Do you wonder that I love him?" whispered Miss Lorna. Even in the whisper I heard the glorious pride of the woman who loves altogether and wholly believes that there is no one like her chosen man. "No," I answered, "for it is no wonder. I only hope—" I stopped, feeling that it would be foolish and unkind to express the doubt I felt. "You hope that I may not be disappointed," said Miss Lorna, still almost in a whisper. "That was what you were going to say, I'm sure." I nodded in spite of myself and met her eyes. They were full of wonderful light. "No one was ever disappointed in him," she murmured. "No living being, neither man nor woman nor child. With him I shall have peace and love without end." "Without end?" "Yes, forever and ever." After dinner we scattered through the great rooms in the soft evening light of mid-June, and by I was standing at an open window, with the mistress of the house looking out across the garden. In the distance Lorna was walking slowly away down the broad avenue with a tall man, and while they were still in sight, though far away, I am sure that I saw his arm steal round her as if he were drawing her on, and her head bent lovingly to his shoulder, and so they glided away into the twilight and disappeared. Then at last I turned to my hostess. "Do you mind telling me the name of that man who came in late and talked so well?" I asked. "You all seem to know him like an old friend." She looked at me in profound surprise. "Do you mean to say that you don't know who he is?" she asked. "No, I never met him before. He is a most extraordinary man to be only a king's messenger." "He is indeed the king's messenger, my dear friend. His name is Death." I dreamed this dream one afternoon last summer, dozing in my chair on deck under the double awning when the Alda was anchored off Goletta, in sight of Carthage, and the cool north breeze was blowing down the deep Gulf of Tunis. I must have been wakened by some slight sound from a boat alongside, for when I opened my eyes, my man was standing a little way off, evidently waiting till I should finish my nap. He brought me a telegram which had just come on board, and I opened it rather drowsily, not expecting any particular news. It was from England, from a very dear friend. "Lorna died suddenly last night at Church Hadley." That was all. The dream had been a message. "With him I shall have peace and love without end." Thank God, I hear those words in her own voice whenever I think of her. End of The King's Messenger.
The Lie by Holloway Horn. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. The Lie by Holloway Horn, from the Blue Magazine and Harper's Bazaar, 1922. The hours had passed with the miraculous rapidity which tinctures time when one is on the river, and now overhead the moon was a gorgeous yellow lantern in a grayish-purple sky. The punt was moored at the lower end of Glover's Island on the Middlesex side, and rose and fell gently on the ebbing tide. A girl was lying back amidst the cushions, her hands behind her head, looking up through the vague tracery of leaves to the soft moonlight. Even in the garish day she was pretty, but in that enchanting dimness she was wildly beautiful. The hint of strength around her mouth was not quite so evident, perhaps. Her hair was the color of oaten straw in autumn, and her deep blue eyes were dark in the gathering night. But despite her beauty, the man's face was averted from her. He was gazing out across the smoothly flowing water, troubled and thoughtful. A good-looking face, but not so strong as the girl's, in spite of her prettiness, and enormously less vital. 10 minutes before he had proposed to her and had been rejected. It was not the first time, but he had been very much more hopeful than on the other occasions. The air was softly, embracingly warm that evening. Together they had watched the lengthening shadows creep out across the old river, and it was spring still, which makes a difference. There is something in the year's youth. The sap is rising in the plants. Something there is, anyway, beyond the sentimentality of the poets. And overhead was the great yellow lantern, gleaming at them through the branches with ironic approval. But in spite of everything, she had shaken her head, and all he received was the maddening assurance that she liked him. "I shall never marry," she had concluded. "Never. You know why." "Yes, I know," the man said miserably. "Carruthers." And so he was looking out moodily, almost savagely, across the water, when the temptation came to him. He would not have minded quite so much if Carruthers had been alive, but he was dead, and slept in the now silent salient where a little cross marked his bed. Alive, one could have striven against him, striven desperately, although Carruthers had always been rather a proposition. But now it seemed hopeless. A man cannot strive with a memory. It was not fair. So the man's thoughts were running. He had shared Carruthers' risks, although he had come back. This persistent and exclusive devotion to a man who would never return to her was morbid. Suddenly his mind was made up. "Olive," he said. "Yes," she replied quietly. "What I am going to tell you, I do for both our sakes. You will probably think I'm a cad, but I'm taking the risk." He was sitting up, but did not meet her eyes. "What on earth are you talking about?" she demanded. "You know that, apart from you, Carruthers and I were pals?" "Yes," she said, wondering, and suddenly she burst out petulantly. "What is it you want to say?" "He was no better than other men," he replied bluntly. "It is wrong that you should sacrifice your life to a memory, wrong that you should worship an idol with feet of clay." "I loathe parables," she said coldly. "Will you tell me exactly what you mean about feet of clay?" The note in her voice was not lost on the man by her side. "I don't like telling you. Under other conditions I wouldn't, but I do it for both our sakes. Then, for goodness sakes, do it. I came across it accidentally at the Gordon Hotel at Brighton. He stayed there whilst he was engaged to you, with the lady whom he described as Mrs. Carruthers. It was on his last leave." "Why do you tell me this?" she asked after a silence. Her voice was low and a little husky. "Surely, my dear, you must see. He was no better than other men. The ideal you have conjured up is no ideal. He was a brave soldier, a darned brave soldier, and, until we both fell in love with you, my pal. But it is not fair that his memory should absorb you. It's unnatural. I suppose you think I should be indignant?" There was no emotion of any kind in her voice. "I simply want you to see that your idol has feet of clay," he said, with the stubbornness of a man who feels he is losing. "What has that to do with it? You know I loved him." "Other girls have loved," he said bitterly. "And forgotten?" "Yes, I know," she interrupted him, "but I do not forget, that is all." "But after what I have told you, surely." "You see, I knew," she said, even more quietly than before. "You knew?" "Yes, it was I who was with him. It was his last leave," she added thoughtfully. And only the faint noise of the water and the wistful wind in the trees overhead broke the silence. End of the lie.
The Oval Portrait by Edgar Allan Poe. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. Read by Chic Bear 1602. The Oval Portrait. The chateau into which my valet had ventured to make forcible entrance, rather than permit me, in my desperately wounded condition, to pass a night in the open air, was one of those piles of commingling gloom and grandeur which have so long frowned upon the Apennines, not less in fact than in the fancy of Mrs. Ratcliffe. To all appearance it had been temporarily and very lately abandoned. We established ourselves in one of the smallest and least sumptuously furnished apartments. It lay in a remote turret of the building. Its decorations were rich, yet tattered and antique. Its walls were hung with tapestry and bedecked with manifold and multiform armorial trophies, together with an unusually great number of very spirited modern paintings in frames of rich golden arabesque. In these paintings, which depended from the walls not only in their main surfaces, but in very many nooks which the bizarre architecture of the chateau rendered necessary, in these paintings my incipient delirium, perhaps, had caused me to take deep interest, so that I bade Pedro to close the heavy shutters of the room, since it was already night, to light the tongues of a tall candelabrum which stood by the head of my bed, and to throw open far and wide the fringed curtains of black velvet which enveloped the bed itself. I wished all this done that I might resign myself, if not to sleep, at least alternately to the contemplation of these pictures, and the perusal of a small volume which had been found upon the pillow, and which purported to criticize and describe them. Long I read, and devoutly I gazed. Rapidly and gloriously the hours flew by, and the deep midnight came. The position of the candelabrum displeased me, and outreaching my hand with difficulty, rather than disturb my slumbering valet, I placed it so as to throw its rays more fully upon the book. But the action produced an effect altogether unanticipated. The rays of the numerous candles, for were there many, now fell within a niche of the room, which had hitherto been thrown into deep shade by one of the bedposts. I thus saw in vivid light a picture all unnoticed before. It was the portrait of a young girl just ripening into womanhood. I glanced at the painting hurriedly, and then closed my eyes. Why I did this was not at first apparent, even to my own perception. But while my lids remained thus shut, I ran over in my mind my reason for so shutting them. It was an impulsive moment to gain time for thought, to make sure that my vision had not deceived me, to calm and subdue my fancy for a more sober and more certain gaze. In a very few moments I again looked fixedly at the painting. That I now saw right I could not and would not doubt, for the first flashing of the candles upon that canvas had seemed to dissipate the dreamy stupor which was stealing over my senses, and to startle me at once into waking life. The portrait, I have already said, was that of a young girl. It was a mere head and shoulders, done in what is technically termed a vignette manner, much in the style of the favourite heads of Sully. The arms, the bosom, and even the ends of the radiant hair melted imperceptibly into the vague yet deep shadow which formed the background of the whole. The frame was oval, richly gilded and filigreed in Moresque. As a thing of art, nothing could be more admirable than the painting itself. But it could have been neither the execution of the work, nor the immortal beauty of the countenance, which had so suddenly and so vehemently moved me. Least of all, it could have been that my fancy, shaken from its half-slumber, had mistaken the head for that of a living person. I saw at once that the peculiarities of the design, of the vignetting, and of the frame must have instantly dispelled such idea, must have prevented even its momentary entertainment. Thinking earnestly upon these points, I remained, for an hour perhaps, half sitting, half reclining, with my vision riveting upon the portrait. At length, satisfied with the true secret of its effect, I fell back within the bed. I had found the spell of the picture in an absolute lifelikeliness of expression, which at first startling, finally confounded, subdued, and appalled me. With deep and reverent awe, I replaced the candelabrum in its former position. The cause of my deep agitation being thus shut from view, I sought eagerly the volume which discussed the paintings and their histories. Turning to the number which designated the oval portrait, I there read the vague and quaint words which follow. She was a maiden of rarest beauty, and not more lovely than full of glee. And evil was the hour when she saw and loved and wedded the painter. He, passionate, studious, austere, and having already a bride in his art. She, a maiden of rarest beauty, and not more lovely than full of glee, all light and smiles, and frolicsome as a young fawn, loving and cherishing all things, hating only the art which was her rival, dreading only the palette and brushes and other untoward instruments which deprived her of the countenance of her lover. It was thus a terrible thing for this lady to hear the painter speak of his desire to portray even his young bride. But she was humble and obedient, and sat meekly for many weeks in the dark, high-turret chamber, where the light dripped upon the pale canvas only from overhead. But he, the painter, took glory in his work, which went on from hour to hour, and from day to day. And he was a passionate, and wild, and moody man, who became lost in reveries, so that he would not see that the light which fell so ghastly in that lone turret withered the health and spirits of his bride, who pined visibly to all but him. Yet she smiled on, and still on, uncomplainingly, because she saw that the painter, who had high renown, took a fervid and burning pleasure in his task, and wrought day and night to depict her who so loved him, yet who grew daily more dispirited and weak. And in sooth some, who beheld the portrait, spoke of its resemblance in low words, as of a mighty marvel, and a proof not less of the power of the painter than of his deep love for her, whom he depicted so surpassingly well. But at length, as the labour drew nearer to its conclusion, there were admitted none into the turret, for the painter had grown wild with the ardour of his work, and turned his eyes from the canvas merely, even to regard the countenance of his wife. And he would not see that the tints which he spread upon the canvas were drawn from the cheeks of her who sate beside him. And when many weeks had passed, and but little remained to do, save one brush upon the mouth and one tint upon the eye, the spirit of the lady again flickered up as the flame within the socket of the lamp. And then the brush was given, and then the tint was placed, and for one moment the painter stood entranced before the work which he had wrought. But in the next, while yet he glazed, he grew tremulous and very pallid, and aghast, and crying with a loud voice, "This is indeed life itself," turned suddenly to regard his beloved. She was dead. End of the Oval Portrait by Edgar Allan Poe.
Tomorrow, Tomorrow by Ivan Turgenev. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. How empty, dull, and useless is almost every day when it is spent. How few the traces it leaves behind it. How meaningless, how foolish those hours as they coursed by one after another. And yet it is man's wish to exist. He prizes life. He rests hopes on it, on himself, on the future. Oh, what blessings he looks for from the future. But why does he imagine that other coming days will not be like this day he has just lived through? Nay, He does not even imagine it. He likes not to think at all, and he does well. Ah, tomorrow, tomorrow. He comforts himself till tomorrow pitches him into the grave. Well, and once in the grave, thou hast no choice. Thou doest no more thinking. End of Tomorrow, Tomorrow. Read by Theo Douglas. Seattle, Washington, June 2025.